The tribe of Benjamin stands as perhaps the most enigmatic of Israel's 12 tribes. From being the cherished son of Jacob's old age to becoming a tribe that committed such horrific acts that the other 11 tribes swore to destroy them completely. Today, we're uncovering the complete timeline of Benjamin, from birth to near extinction, and revealing why God allowed one of the 12 tribes to come so close to being erased from history. But before we dive in, if you find this type of content valuable, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We'd love to hear from you. So, without further ado, let's begin, shall we? The hills of Gibeah lay silent under the scorching sun. Where children once played and markets bustled, only ashes danced in the wind. 600 men huddled on the distant rock of Rimmon, their eyes hollow with grief. These few remained from what was once the proud tribe of Benjamin, a family nearly erased from history. How did it come to this? How did brothers turn against brothers with such fury that an entire tribe faced extinction? The story begins not with hatred but with love, the love of a father for his youngest son. In the aftermath of this devastation, Israel wept. They had won their war but lost their soul. The fields where Benjaminite farmers once tended crops now grew wild with thorns. Villages stood abandoned, with doors swinging open on empty homes. The smell of smoke lingered for seasons, a constant reminder of the fire of vengeance that had burned too hot. The survivors, these last sons of Benjamin, would rebuild from ashes. Their descendants would one day give Israel its first king, but they would forever carry the marks of this near destruction, this divine punishment that came not from enemies, but from their own kin. This is not merely a tale of ancient warfare. It speaks to the delicate threads that bind families and nations together, and how quickly those bonds can unravel when justice and mercy fall out of balance. As we journey back through time, we'll witness a family's beginnings in love and tragedy. We'll follow their path through slavery and freedom, through conquest and settlement. We'll watch as a single horrible crime triggers a cascade of violence that nearly destroys them all. The winds shifted through the empty doorways of Benjamin's cities. Dust gathered on abandoned millstones. In the tribal territories surrounding this devastated land, Israel's families looked toward the remnant, hiding on their rock, and wondered, what happens now? Can a tribe be rebuilt from just 600 men? Should it be? The answer would shape the future of a nation. It would test the limits of forgiveness and reveal the true strength of covenant bonds. It would show that sometimes survival itself is an act of defiance against fate. This is the story of Benjamin, the son of the right hand who became the tribe of the left hand. This is the tale of Israel's most troubled family, whose darkest hour nearly became their final chapter. This is the chronicle of a curse, a crime, and ultimately an unlikely redemption that would echo through generations. The youngest son, Benjamin's origins. Under a clear Canaanite sky, Rachel labored on the road to Ephrath. Jacob clutched her hand as her breath grew shallow. Their long-awaited second son was coming, but something was wrong. With her final strength, she named him Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow. Then she slipped away, leaving Jacob cradling their newborn in trembling arms. Jacob could not bear to call his son by this name of grief. Instead, he chose Benjamin, son of the right hand, son of favor. This tiny baby would never know his mother's touch, but he would feel her absence like a shadow across his life. Benjamin grew up watching his father's face for signs of that old grief. He noticed how Jacob's eyes sometimes misted over while looking at him, seeing perhaps the ghost of Rachel in his features. The boy bore a double burden, being the living reminder of both precious love and unbearable loss. The older brothers viewed Benjamin with complicated feelings. To them, he represented Jacob's obvious favoritism toward Rachel's sons. They had already sold Joseph, Rachel's firstborn, into slavery out of jealousy. But Benjamin was different, too young to provoke their anger, too innocent to be hated. Instead, he became something almost sacred to the family, their father's last comfort. Under date palms and olive trees, Benjamin learned the shepherd's life. Unlike Joseph with his dreams and fine coat, Benjamin kept quiet and stayed close to his father's tent. He absorbed the family stories of his grandfather Isaac's near sacrifice, of his grandmother Rebekah's cleverness, of his father's wrestling match with a divine being. These tales shaped his understanding of a God who tested and blessed in equal measure. As years passed, Benjamin grew into a thoughtful young man with steady hands and watchful eyes. He lacked Joseph's charm and Judah's natural leadership, but he possessed something uniquely valuable: the ability to keep peace among his fractious brothers. When tempers flared over grazing rights or water access, Benjamin often stepped between, his calm presence diffusing tensions. Then came the whispers of famine. Crops withered in the fields and the family's flocks grew thin. Jacob's household, once prosperous, now faced hunger. The brothers spoke of Egypt, where grain remained plentiful. All would go except Benjamin. Benjamin. Jacob could not bear to risk losing Rachel's last son. The pattern established in those early years would echo throughout Benjamin's descendants. They would often find themselves caught between opposing forces, serving as buffers and bridges. This mediator role brought both blessing and curse, making them essential to Israel's unity while exposing them to dangers from all sides. Benjamin carried his mother's memory like a sacred trust. At her grave marker on the road to Ephrath, he would sometimes sit alone, trying to form a picture of her face from his brother's descriptions. Did he have her eyes, her smile? No one could quite say. Time had blurred their memories. As Benjamin matured, whispers reached the family of a powerful Egyptian official who resembled Joseph. Jacob dismissed these rumors as wishful thinking, but Benjamin held them close. At night, he sometimes dreamed of a reunion he could barely imagine, meeting the brother who existed for him only in family legends. What marked Benjamin most deeply was his father's protective love. While his brothers roamed freely, Benjamin lived within the circle of Jacob's anxious care. This sheltering shaped him, made him both gentler and more vulnerable than his brothers. He developed keen observation skills, but lacked their hardened resilience. This trait, too, would echo through his tribe's future, making them both insightful and more susceptible to influence. In the quiet evenings, as the family gathered around the fire, Benjamin's place was always at his father's right hand, living out the meaning of his name. The older brothers accepted this arrangement with resigned understanding. The boy had lost his mother at birth. Let him have this closeness to their father. Benjamin grew up hearing stories of Joseph's supposed death, never suspecting the elaborate deception his brothers had constructed. He learned to be careful with sheep, but not with people. He trusted easily, another tribal trait that would one day lead to both great loyalty and devastating misjudgment. The foundation was being laid for everything that would follow. In this youngest son of Jacob, born in tragedy and raised in protective love, we see the seeds of a tribe whose story would contain both remarkable triumph and catastrophic downfall. The bond between brothers, Joseph and Benjamin. The brothers shared more than blood. They shared absence. Joseph, taken from the family through betrayal, and Benjamin, never knowing his mother except through stories. These twin losses created a space between them that no one else could truly understand. When the brothers spoke of Joseph to young Benjamin, their eyes shifted away, voices growing strangely tight. They described a dreamer, a favorite son with a coat of many colors who met a tragic end. Benjamin absorbed these tales, forming an image of his lost brother that was part truth, part fiction, and part unspoken guilt. Years passed, and Benjamin grew to resemble Joseph in subtle ways, a gesture here, an expression there. Jacob would sometimes catch these glimpses and fall silent, lost in memory. The old man's heart remained divided between grief for one son and overwhelming protective love for the other. Unlike his older brothers, who worked the fields and tended flocks far from home, Benjamin stayed close to his father's tent. He learned the family histories in greater detail than any brother before him. Jacob shared stories of his own youth, his conflict with Esau, his love for Rachel, his wrestling with the divine. Through these tales, Benjamin formed a unique understanding of their family's covenant with God. What Benjamin couldn't know was how Joseph thought of him during those long years in Egypt. In quiet moments between interpreting dreams and managing Pharaoh's grain supplies, Joseph would wonder about his little brother. Had he grown tall? Did he have Rachel's laugh? These questions kept the bond alive across vast distances and years of separation. The brothers formed a sacred pair in Jacob's mind, Rachel's boys, the children of his great love. Though separated by tragedy, they remained connected in the old man's heart. When he blessed his sons, he would place his hand on Benjamin's head, but speak words that seemed meant for both absent Joseph and present Benjamin. The Benjamite's characteristic loyalty was born in these formative years. Watching his father maintain devotion to Joseph's memory despite all evidence of his death, Benjamin learned that love transcends separation. This fierce fidelity would later define his tribe, sometimes leading them to stand by allies even when wisdom counseled otherwise. When famine finally forced the family to seek food in Egypt, Jacob's terror at potentially losing Benjamin revealed how deeply the trauma of Joseph's disappearance had scarred him. The old man clung to his youngest son, unable to face the prospect of losing both of Rachel's children. What Jacob couldn't see was that this protective love had left Benjamin unprepared for the wider world. The youngest brother had developed keen observation skills, but lacked the hardened experience of his brothers. When he finally journeyed to Egypt, everything would be new to his eyes: the sprawling cities, the foreign customs, the subtle political currents. Benjamin carried with him an unseen inheritance: his mother's beauty and his lost brother's charisma. When he finally stood before the Egyptian official who controlled their fate, he couldn't know he was looking into eyes that matched his own. Joseph, disguised by time and foreign dress, felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble at the sight of his mother's features in his brother's face. The silver cup planted in Benjamin's sack would test bonds formed over decades. Would the brothers who once abandoned Joseph now sacrifice Benjamin to save themselves? Or had time and maturity transformed their hearts? This moment would reveal whether the family had truly healed or merely covered old wounds with silence. When Joseph finally revealed himself, Benjamin was the first he embraced. The tears they shed together washed away years of separation. Two brothers who had never known each other as adults discovered they were still connected by invisible threads of blood and memory. This powerful reunion shaped Benjamin's understanding of divine providence. What seemed like abandoned promises and senseless suffering had actually been threads in a larger tapestry of preservation and reconciliation. His tribe would hold to this perspective through their darkest moments, trusting that even apparent destruction might be part of a redemptive plan. In Egypt, the brothers forged a new relationship built not on childhood memories, but on adult appreciation. Joseph found in Benjamin a sincerity absent in his other brothers. Benjamin discovered in Joseph a wisdom tempered by suffering. Together, they became the beating heart of Jacob's family in this foreign land. The famine in Canaan, the test in Egypt. The skies over Canaan turned a relentless blue, without a cloud in sight for months. Fields cracked under the merciless sun as crops withered and livestock grew thin. In Jacob's household, meal portions shrank daily. The old man watched with growing dread as storerooms emptied and hope dimmed. News traveled on dry winds. Egypt had grain in abundance. The same Egyptian foresight that had built storehouses during years of plenty now drew desperate families from surrounding lands. Jacob turned to his sons with reluctance in his voice. "Go to Egypt and buy food for us, that we may live and not die." All would go except Benjamin. Jacob's heart couldn't bear the thought of losing Rachel's last son. The brothers departed with silver and empty sacks, leaving Benjamin to comfort their aging father. They couldn't know they were walking toward a divine appointment 20 years in the making. In Egypt's grand palace, a disguised Joseph recognized his brothers instantly. They bowed before him, just as his youthful dreams had foretold. With the cold voice of a stranger, he accused them of being spies. Behind this harsh facade, Joseph crafted a test to reveal whether time had changed their hearts. Back in Canaan, Jacob listened with horror as his sons described the Egyptian ruler's demand. Benjamin must come with them on their next journey. "The man solemnly warned us," they explained, "you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you." The old man's refusal was immediate and absolute, but hunger proves a persuasive force. As food supplies dwindled again, even Jacob recognized the inevitable. With trembling hands, he finally released Benjamin to his brother's care, sending choice gifts for the Egyptian ruler and double the silver required. His parting words revealed a heart prepared for the worst. "If I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." On the road to Egypt, Benjamin noticed his brother's unusual attentiveness. They positioned themselves protectively around him, showed him special consideration at mealtimes, and checked frequently that he was managing the journey well. This wasn't merely concern for a younger brother, it was the vigilance of men determined not to fail a sacred trust. Upon their arrival, Joseph's steward surprised them with an invitation to dine at the ruler's house. Fear gripped the brothers. Surely this unusual honor masked some trap. Benjamin observed their anxiety with curiosity. What had happened during their previous visit to cause such dread? The banquet that followed bewildered them all. The Egyptian ruler seated them in perfect birth order, an impossible coincidence. He sent Benjamin portions 5 times larger than his brothers received. Throughout the meal, Benjamin felt the ruler's eyes upon him, studying his face with an intensity that seemed almost personal. Morning brought the final test. With sacks filled with grain and silver secretly returned, the brothers set out for Canaan. Their relief was palpable, until the steward overtook them, accusing them of stealing the ruler's silver cup. A search revealed the cup in Benjamin's sack, planted there by Joseph's design. The moment of truth had arrived. Would the brothers abandon Benjamin to slavery in Egypt, as they had once abandoned Joseph? Or would they stand by their youngest brother, whatever the cost? Judah stepped forward with transformed character, offering himself as a slave in Benjamin's place. His impassioned plea revealed how deeply Jacob's potential grief haunted them all. Joseph could maintain his disguise no longer. Ordering all attendants from the room, he revealed himself to his astonished brothers. "I am Joseph," he declared, his voice breaking. "Is my father still alive?" Benjamin stood frozen, unable to process that this powerful Egyptian was the brother he had known only through stories. The embrace that followed bridged decades of separation. Joseph clung to Benjamin, both men weeping without restraint. The brothers who shared Rachel's blood were finally united, their tears washing away years of loss and longing. For Benjamin, it was like finding a missing piece of himself, a connection to the mother he had never known. Joseph explained how God had transformed betrayal into salvation, sending him ahead to preserve the family during this famine. Benjamin listened in awe as divine purpose revealed itself in what had seemed merely human cruelty. This perspective would shape his tribe's understanding of providence for generations to come. With Pharaoh's blessing, Joseph sent his brothers home with wagons, provisions, and an invitation. Bring Jacob and all their households to Egypt, where they would be provided for during the remaining years of famine. Benjamin returned to Canaan, carrying precious gifts and an even more precious truth. His lost brother lived, and God's hand had been guiding their family all along. Jacob's face, upon hearing their news, transformed from grief-etched resignation to stunned disbelief to radiating joy. "Joseph, my son, is still alive," he kept repeating. "I will go and see him before I die." For Benjamin, watching his father's resurrection from despair was perhaps the greatest miracle of all. A new beginning, Benjamin in Egypt. The caravan stretched across the desert like a living river. Jacob's entire household, sons and daughters, grandchildren and servants, flocks and belongings, flowed toward a new life in Egypt. Benjamin rode near his father's wagon, watching the old man's face alternate between nervous anticipation and peaceful trust. Goshen welcomed them with fertile fields and abundant water. Here in this Egyptian province, Jacob's family would put down temporary roots that would last for centuries. Benjamin helped establish their settlement, marveling at how quickly his brothers adapted to this foreign land while maintaining their distinct identity as Hebrews. Joseph's position secured them royal favor. The family that had nearly starved now lived in unprecedented prosperity. Benjamin's children played in Egyptian gardens while learning the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They grew comfortable in this foreign land, perhaps too comfortable for a family meant to inherit Canaan. Benjamin's household expanded rapidly in this land of plenty. His 10 sons, Bela, Besher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ahi, Rosh, Mupim, Hupim, and Ard, established families that would form the core of the tribe's future identity. Each brought different talents and temperaments to the growing clan. Bela showed leadership qualities, while Gera demonstrated remarkable insight into people's motivations. Besher revealed skill with numbers and records, keeping careful account of the family's increasing wealth. When Jacob gathered his sons for his final blessing, Benjamin received a puzzling prophecy. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. These words contrasted sharply with Benjamin's gentle nature. The youngest son could not know that his descendants would transform these words into a fearsome reputation for battle prowess. After Jacob's elaborate burial in Canaan, tension rippled through the brothers. Would Joseph now seek revenge for their past betrayal? Benjamin watched in admiration as Joseph reassured them with profound wisdom. "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." This perspective, finding divine purpose in human darkness, would become characteristic of Benjamin's tribe through generations of hardship. As decades passed and Joseph's generation died, Egypt's attitude toward the Hebrews gradually shifted. New pharaohs arose who did not know Joseph, and the honored guests slowly transformed into suspicious foreigners and eventually slaves. Benjamin did not live to see the worst of this transition, but he witnessed its beginning with growing concern. Before his death, Benjamin gathered his sons and grandsons. He shared again the stories of Abraham's calling, Isaac's near sacrifice, Jacob's dream at Bethel, and Joseph's redemptive journey. "We are sojourners here," he reminded them. "Egypt is not our home. Never forget that God promised Canaan to our fathers." The tribe of Benjamin maintained certain distinctive traits through these Egyptian years. They developed reputation for ambidexterity, training both hands equally, which would later make them exceptional warriors. They preserved the purity of their Hebrew language with unusual dedication. And they cultivated close bonds with the tribe of Judah, a relationship that would prove crucial in distant centuries. Benjamin's sons honored their father with an Egyptian-style funeral that nonetheless incorporated Hebrew traditions. They wrapped his body according to Egyptian custom, but sang the ancient songs of Canaan. This blending reflected their reality, a Hebrew family living in a foreign culture while holding fast to their unique identity and divine promises. The generations that followed would face increasing hardship as Egyptian oppression intensified. Yet something of Benjamin's quiet resilience persisted in his descendants. They endured, they adapted, but they never forgot who they were or the land promised to their ancestors. When Moses eventually arose as deliverer, Benjamin's tribe stood ready. They had maintained their tribal records with remarkable precision through centuries of bondage. They knew exactly who they were, descendants of the son of the right hand, who had been born in sorrow but raised in love. This clear sense of identity would sustain them through desert wanderings and military campaigns alike. The Benjamites carried with them their forefathers' legacy, a unique perspective shaped by being the youngest, by losing his mother at birth, by being protected yet observant, by witnessing the dramatic reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers. These experiences created a tribe with distinctive characteristics: loyal yet fierce, peaceful until provoked, thoughtful but capable of devastating action. As they departed Egypt in the Exodus, Benjamin's tribe numbered 35,400 fighting men. They had transformed from a single family into a significant force. The wolf of Jacob's prophecy had found its strength, and in the wilderness journey ahead would discover its purpose. The blessing and the prophecy. Jacob's final words. The air in Jacob's tent hung heavy with significance. His 12 sons gathered close, summoned to hear their father's final words. Benjamin, the youngest, knelt nearest to the old man's bedside, watching the labored rise and fall of his chest. Outside, the Egyptian sun cast long shadows as it descended toward the horizon. Jacob's voice strengthened as he began to speak, defying his failing body. To each son he offered not merely a blessing, but a prophecy, a glimpse into the character and destiny of the tribes that would bear their names. The brothers listened with solemn attention as their futures unfolded through their father's inspired words. When Jacob's gaze finally turned to Benjamin, his eyes softened with the special affection he had always shown Rachel's youngest son. Yet the words that followed carried an unexpected weight. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. The gentlest of brothers described as a predator, Benjamin's eyes widened slightly, but he accepted the pronouncement with characteristic quietness. Unlike some of his brothers who received lengthy prophetic passages, Benjamin's future was captured in this single, vivid image: a wolf that both hunts successfully and shares its bounty. This prophetic picture contained layers of meaning that would unfold across centuries. The wolf imagery suggested military prowess, a surprising destiny for the protected youngest son. Morning and evening spoke of comprehensive success throughout the day of history. The sharing of spoils hinted at generosity alongside strength. The prophecy's dual nature mirrored Benjamin's own complex heritage. Born as son of sorrow, but renamed son of the right hand, his identity contained both shadow and light. His tribe would reflect this complexity, capable of both remarkable loyalty and shocking violence, of both wisdom and reckless passion. Jacob's strength ebbed after delivering these final prophecies. He drew Benjamin close for a personal blessing beyond what the others could hear, perhaps sharing memories of Rachel or wisdom specifically for the son who had never known his mother. Whatever these private words contained, they seemed to bring peace to both father and son. As night fell over Egypt, Jacob breathed his last. Benjamin joined his brothers in grief, yet his sorrow carried a different quality. For him, losing Jacob meant losing his most direct connection to his mother. The stories, the memories, the sense of who Rachel had been, all these had lived primarily through Jacob's loving recollections. The embalming process took 40 days, following Egyptian custom. During this time, Benjamin often found himself standing apart, contemplating his father's final words. Wolf, predator, hunter. These descriptions felt foreign to his nature, yet something in them resonated with a deeper truth he couldn't fully articulate. The journey to Canaan for Jacob's burial allowed Benjamin to see his ancestral homeland for the first time as an adult. As they laid their father to rest in the cave of Machpelah alongside Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and Leah, Benjamin felt the weight of his heritage. This land, not Egypt, was their true home, promised by covenant to their descendants. Returning to Egypt, Benjamin noticed subtle changes in his sons. They stood straighter, watched more carefully, moved with greater purpose. Had Jacob's prophecy awakened something in them? Or had the journey to Canaan kindled an awareness of their true identity? Either way, the wolf was stirring. In the years that followed, Benjamin noted how his tribe developed distinctive traits that fulfilled aspects of Jacob's prophecy. They cultivated ambidexterity, training both hands equally for warfare. They developed unusual skill with the sling, able to target with remarkable precision. Their strategic thinking in conflicts revealed the wolf's cunning. Yet they also maintained the gentler qualities Benjamin had embodied. They valued loyalty above almost all virtues. They showed special kindness to strangers and vulnerable community members. The evening division of spoils from Jacob's prophecy manifested in their reputation for generosity. As Egypt's attitude toward the Hebrews deteriorated, Benjamin's descendants drew strength from their prophetic identity. When oppression intensified and hope dimmed, they reminded each other of Jacob's words. The wolf endures. The wolf survives. The wolf knows when to fight and when to wait. Benjamin did not live to see Moses arise or the Exodus begin, but he planted seeds that would flower during those momentous events. He taught his children to maintain their distinct identity while living in a foreign culture. He instilled in them both the courage to face adversaries and the wisdom to choose their battles carefully. Most importantly, he helped them understand the paradox at the heart of their tribal character. The same intensity that made them fearsome in battle could make them compassionate in peace. The same loyalty that bound them to allies could blind them to those allies' flaws. The same independence that gave them strength could isolate them from needed counsel. The wolf of Jacob's prophecy would indeed manifest through generations of Benjamites, sometimes in glory, sometimes in tragedy. From Ehud, the left-handed judge, to Saul, the troubled king, from valiant warriors to misguided defenders of wrong, the tribe would embody both the best and worst implications of their patriarch's final words. Shar, the Exodus and the wilderness years. Generations passed in Egyptian bondage. The family of Jacob, once honored guests, became feared outsiders and finally enslaved laborers. Through these dark centuries, Benjamin's descendants preserved their tribal identity with remarkable tenacity, passing down stories of their origins and divine promises through whispered bedtime tales and songs sung while making bricks. When Moses appeared with his demand to Pharaoh, "Let my people go," the tribe of Benjamin stood ready. They had grown numerous despite oppression, counting 35,400 fighting men in their ranks. The gentle youngest son's descendants had indeed become a formidable force, just as Jacob's wolf prophecy suggested. During the terrifying, magnificent night of the first Passover, Benjamite families huddled together in Goshen. They brushed lamb's blood on their doorposts and listened to death pass over their homes while claiming Egypt's firstborn. By morning, they joined the great Exodus, leaving the only home most had ever known to follow an elderly shepherd toward an uncertain future. The wilderness journey tested every tribe. Food and water shortages, enemy attacks, and internal conflicts revealed both strengths and weaknesses in each family line. The Benjamites showed remarkable adaptability. Their Egyptian-born generations adjusted to desert life with determined flexibility. Moses organized Israel's camp in specific order around the tabernacle. Benjamin's tribe received placement on the west side alongside Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph. This arrangement honored the special bond between Joseph and Benjamin, placing Rachel's descendants together as a family unit within the larger nation. When the 12 spies explored Canaan, Benjamin's representative stood with the minority who trusted God's promise despite the land's challenges. This loyalty to divine covenant, rather than human assessment, revealed the tribe's spiritual character. They had learned from their patriarch to look beyond surface appearances to deeper purposes. The wilderness generation's gradual passing brought Benjamin's tribe to a crucial transition point. Those born in Egyptian slavery had died. Those born in desert freedom prepared to enter the Promised Land. They carried forward Benjamin's legacy not through personal memory but through tribal identity, carefully preserved through centuries of waiting. Under Joshua's leadership, the Benjamites revealed their warrior spirit. Swift, strategic, and surprisingly fierce for their relatively small numbers, they embodied the wolf imagery from Jacob's prophecy. Their fighters developed specialties. Many became expert slingers, able to target with deadly accuracy. Others mastered the use of both hands in combat, making them unpredictable opponents. The wilderness years had transformed Benjamin's descendants in significant ways. Egyptian oppression had hardened their resolve. Desert wandering had honed their resourcefulness. Divine provision had deepened their faith. The gentle youngest son's tribe had become known for both fierce loyalty and formidable fighting ability, protectors who could also become predators when threatened. Throughout this formative period, the tribe maintained certain distinctive practices. They preserved their sacred songs with special care, developing rich musical traditions that would later enrich Jerusalem's temple worship. They maintained close ties with Judah's tribe, establishing patterns of alliance that would prove significant in coming centuries. As Israel prepared to cross the Jordan River, Benjamin's tribe held a unique perspective. They had never forgotten their true homeland, despite being born in foreign territories. Unlike some tribes who occasionally longed for Egypt's predictability or feared Canaan's challenges, the Benjamites remained steadfastly focused on claiming their inheritance. The long-awaited moment finally arrived. With the Jordan's waters miraculously parted, Benjamin's tribe crossed into the Promised Land. Their feet touched the soil their forefather had never seen as an adult. The promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was beginning its fulfillment through their presence. What awaited them was not immediate peace, but prolonged conflict. The conquest of Canaan would demand every bit of the wolf-like qualities Jacob had prophesied over Benjamin. The tribe would need to hunt in the morning, fighting with strategic precision. They would need to divide spoil in the evening, sharing resources wisely as they established their territory. The wilderness had prepared them for this moment. Generations of hardship had distilled in them a resilience that would prove crucial in the challenges ahead. Benjamin's descendants carried forward not just his name, but his essential character: observant, loyal, capable of both gentleness and fierceness as circumstances required. As the tribal territories were allocated, Benjamin would receive a small but strategically vital region. Their position would place them at the crossroads of Israel's future history, a buffer zone between larger tribes, a connecting point between north and south. This geographical reality would shape their destiny in ways none could yet foresee. Benjamin's tribe entered Canaan with Jacob's prophecy still echoing across generations: wolf, hunter, divider of spoil. The wilderness years had begun transforming promise into reality. The conquest would continue this process, revealing how thoroughly the youngest son's descendants had absorbed both their patriarch's gentle wisdom and their prophetic identity as warriors. The conquest of Canaan, Benjamin's territory. The walls of Jericho lay in ruins, Israel's first major victory in the Promised Land. As the dust settled, Joshua began the complex process of dividing Canaan among the 12 tribes. When lots were cast for Benjamin's territory, the outcome seemed modest compared to larger tribes. Yet this small allocation would prove strategically significant beyond its size. Benjamin received a compact region situated between Judah to the south and Ephraim to the north. Though limited in area, this territory occupied the geographical heart of the Promised Land. Its hills formed a natural fortress, while its valleys provided rich agricultural possibilities. Most importantly, it straddled the main north-south route through the Central Highlands, positioning Benjamin as Israel's crossroads. Within these borders lay sites of profound spiritual significance. Bethel, where Jacob had dreamed of a ladder reaching to heaven, marked Benjamin's northern boundary. Jabus, later Jerusalem, sat at its southwestern edge, shared with Judah, a seemingly unimportant Canaanite stronghold that would one day become the nation's capital. Gibeon, Ramah, and Mizpah dotted its central region, each destined for important roles in Israel's unfolding story. The Benjamites approached their inheritance with characteristic thoroughness. They surveyed boundary markers, established settlements, and developed defensive positions with methodical care. Their relatively small numbers, they remained one of Israel's less populous tribes, meant they had to be strategic about how they utilized their limited manpower. This compact territory created both advantages and challenges. Benjamin's warriors could rapidly respond to threats throughout their region, maintaining tight control over their borders. Yet their position between larger tribes meant they were constantly navigating complex relationships with more powerful neighbors. They became diplomats by necessity, developing skills in mediation and alliance building. Perhaps most consequential was Benjamin's role as a buffer zone between the northern and southern tribes. This geographical reality would shape Israel's history for centuries to come. When tribal tensions flared, Benjamin often found itself caught in the middle, forced to choose sides or attempt to broker peace from its central position. The tribe's military capabilities developed in response to these circumstances. Bounded by larger neighbors and potential enemies, Benjamin's fighters specialized in defensive tactics suited to their hilly terrain. They became expert in ambush techniques, using their intimate knowledge of the landscape to maximum advantage. Their warriors continued developing ambidextrous combat skills, allowing them greater versatility in battle. Jebusites remained in Jerusalem, a thorn in Benjamin's southwestern border that neither they nor neighboring Judah could initially remove. This persistent Canaanite pocket symbolized the incomplete nature of Israel's conquest, divine promises partially but not fully realized. The city would remain in foreign hands until David's time, centuries later. Benjamin's territory included natural resources that shaped their tribal economy. Their hills contained clay deposits ideal for pottery, leading to distinctive Benjamite ceramic traditions. Valleys suitable for grain cultivation ensured relative food security. Strategic trade routes crossing their land created opportunities for commerce and cultural exchange, though also exposure to outside religious influences. As the conquest phase gave way to settlement, Benjamin's position as Israel's geographical center heightened its importance in national life. Tribal assemblies often convened at Mizpah within their territory. Religious ceremonies took place at Bethel on their northern border. Their centrality made them witnesses to and often participants in events affecting the entire nation. The tribes surrounding Benjamin each influenced their development in different ways. From Judah, they absorbed strong traditions of Mosaic law-keeping. From Ephraim, they gained political awareness and administrative skills. From eastern neighbors across the Jordan, they learned techniques for defending against desert raiders. This cultural cross-pollination created a tribe both grounded in tradition and adaptable to changing circumstances. Benjamin's warriors earned respect among the tribes despite their relatively small numbers. What they lacked in quantity, they compensated for in quality, developing elite fighting units known for discipline and tactical innovation. Their signature weapon became the sling, used with devastating accuracy. Stories spread of Benjamite slingers who could target a hair's breadth without missing. These military capabilities would prove crucial during the unsettled period that followed Joshua's death. As Central Highlands dwellers, Benjamites faced different challenges than coastal or valley tribes. They developed fighting techniques suited specifically to their mountainous homeland, quick strikes followed by tactical retreats into familiar terrain. The conquest generation gave way to their children, who knew neither Egyptian bondage nor wilderness wandering. This new generation of Benjamites inherited territory rather than conquering it themselves. Their perspective shifted subtly but significantly, from grateful recipients of divine promise to comfortable inhabitants taking their homeland for granted. Seeds of future conflict were planted during this settlement period. Benjamin's strategic location meant they witnessed the ebb and flow of Israel's spiritual fidelity. When neighboring tribes drifted toward Canaanite practices, these influences inevitably seeped across Benjamin's borders. Their position as Israel's crossroads brought both blessing and temptation. What no one could foresee was how Benjamin's modest territory would later place them at the epicenter of national events. Their hills would witness both Israel's greatest triumphs and darkest tragedies. Their towns would host prophets and kings. Their valleys would echo with both worship songs and war cries. For now, they completed their settlement with characteristic thoroughness, establishing 26 towns and villages throughout their territory. Each settlement reflected Benjamin's practical nature, positioned near water sources, protected by natural features, connected to travel routes. They built not for grandeur, but for security and sustainability. As the conquest period ended, Benjamin had successfully claimed their inheritance. They had transformed from a family line into a territorial entity. Jacob's prophecy continued unfolding through their development. The wolf had found its den in Canaan's central hills. What remained to be seen was whether they would maintain their balance between strength and wisdom in the challenging periods that lay ahead. The Judges, Benjamin's rise and fall. The era of Judges dawned on Israel like a fitful fever dream. Without central leadership, the tribal confederacy lurched between faith and apostasy, victory and defeat, divine deliverance, and chaotic violence. For Benjamin, positioned at Israel's geographical crossroads, these national cycles played out with particular intensity in their territory. Early in this troubled period, Benjamin produced one of Israel's most unconventional deliverers, Ehud, a left-handed warrior who turned perceived weakness into strategic advantage. When Moabite oppression had crushed Israel's spirit for 18 years, this Benjamite assassin engineered a daring liberation. Ehud's left-handedness reflected a wider Benjamite trait. The tribe cultivated ambidexterity, training warriors to fight effectively with either hand. This practice gave them tactical unpredictability in battle and became something of a tribal signature. Enemies facing Benjamite fighters could never be certain which side an attack might come from. Under Ehud's leadership, Benjamin briefly rose to national prominence. Their territory enjoyed peace for 80 years, a remarkable stretch of stability in the chaotic Judges period. Their reputation for both clever strategy and fierce fighting grew throughout Israel. For a time, it seemed Benjamin had found perfect balance between the wolf's cunning and the youngest son's wisdom. But as generations passed, spiritual decay crept through Israel like a slow poison. Without consistent leadership or religious education, the people drifted toward Canaanite practices and values. Benjamin's central position exposed them to these corrupting influences from multiple directions. Their towns became stopping points for travelers carrying foreign ideas and customs. The tribe that had once exemplified loyalty to covenant now demonstrated how quickly strength could become brutality when disconnected from divine guidance. Their fierce protection of tribal honor, once channeled toward defending Israel, gradually twisted into something darker, a readiness to use violence to preserve their reputation at any cost. This transformation didn't happen overnight. It came through subtle compromises, through the gradual normalization of behaviors that earlier generations would have rejected outright. The shift was most evident in Gibeah, a Benjamite town whose name ironically meant hill, suggesting elevation and visibility when it had actually sunk into moral darkness. Throughout this period, Benjamin maintained its distinctive identity. Their warriors continued training in specialized combat techniques. Their pottery styles retained characteristic elements. Their dialect preserved unique phrases and expressions. But beneath these cultural continuities, something essential was changing in their tribal character. The lack of strong central authority during the judges' period meant that tribal justice systems operated with little oversight or standardization. Benjamin developed particularly insular practices, handling matters internally with increasing resistance to outside input. This isolation would prove catastrophic when confronted with a crime too heinous to be addressed through normal channels. As Israel's moral compass spun wildly, the biblical writer captured the essence of the time in a haunting refrain. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. For Benjamin, this individualistic ethos would lead them to defend the indefensible, choosing tribal solidarity over justice in a moment that would nearly destroy them. Not all Benjamites embraced moral decline. Pockets of faithful families maintained covenant traditions, preserving Torah teachings and passing down stories of divine deliverance. These quiet resistors watched with growing alarm as their tribal leadership drifted from ancient values. Their voices, however, grew increasingly marginalized as power concentrated among those willing to use force to maintain their authority. The stage was being set for catastrophe. Benjamin, the beloved youngest son, the protected one, the tribe of both gentleness and strength, had allowed its warrior identity to overwhelm its wisdom. The wolf prophesied by Jacob had forgotten how to divide the spoil in the evening, remembering only how to devour prey in the morning. Travelers began avoiding Benjamite towns when possible, spreading whispered warnings about the territory's growing reputation for lawlessness. Neighboring tribes watched with concern as Benjamin's internal governance deteriorated. But in the fragmented reality of Judges-era Israel, no mechanism existed for intervention before crisis erupted. The tribal elders who should have provided moral guidance had themselves become compromised. When younger men engaged in increasingly aggressive behavior, these leaders offered justification rather than correction. They rewrote tribal history to emphasize Benjamin's warrior legacy while downplaying its traditions of justice and covenant fidelity. Even as these troubling developments unfolded, Benjamin maintained its strategic importance in Israel's tribal structure. Their territory still formed the crucial bridge between north and south. Their warriors still defended passes and roadways vital to national security. Their geographical position ensured they remained essential to Israel's survival even as their moral standing deteriorated. What happened next would shake Israel to its foundations. A single night of violence in Gibeah would trigger a cascade of horrors that would leave Benjamin decimated, their cities in ruins, and their survivors hiding in remote wilderness. The protected youngest son would become the target of national vengeance. The wolf would find itself hunted nearly to extinction. Half the Levite's concubine. The trigger event. Night fell over Gibeah, a Benjamite town perched among the central highlands. An elderly man hurried through darkening streets, glancing nervously at gathering shadows. He had spotted travelers sitting exposed in the town square, a Levite, his concubine, and their servant. No one had offered them shelter, breaking ancient hospitality customs. The old man, himself a foreigner to Gibeah, recognized the danger and urged them to his home instead. The meal had barely begun when pounding fists shook the door. Outside stood men of the city, demanding the Levite be handed over for their sexual abuse. Their slurred voices and violent threats revealed how far Gibeah had fallen from Israel's covenant standards. This scene horrifically echoed Sodom's wickedness from Abraham's day, but this was happening not among Canaanites, but within a town of Jacob's descendants. What followed defies gentle telling. The Levite thrust his concubine outside to save himself. Night swallowed her screams as the mob brutalized her until dawn. At first light, the Levite found her collapsed at the doorway, reaching toward a salvation that never came. His command, "Get up, let's go," met only silence. Her suffering had ended in death. Numb with rage and shame, the Levite placed her body on his donkey and returned home. There, grief transformed into calculated fury. He took a knife and divided her body into 12 pieces, sending one to each tribal territory with a message, This is what happens in Benjamin's Gibeah. Israel recoiled in horror. The pieces arrived like ghastly messengers, inducing shock, revulsion, and outrage. Few in living memory could recall a crime so brutal or a summons so visceral. Ancient laws demanded response to such bloodshed, lest the land itself be polluted. From Dan to Beersheba, tribal representatives prepared for an emergency assembly. This gruesome incident crystallized trends that had been developing for generations. Gibeah's violence didn't emerge from nowhere. It grew from soil long prepared by moral compromise. The town represented Benjamin's darkest potential when the wolf prophecy manifested without ethical constraints. What should have been protective strength had corrupted into predatory brutality. The Levites' messaging proved effective, if manipulative. When questioned at the National Assembly, he presented a simplified account that emphasized Gibeah's guilt while minimizing his own cowardice. His testimony elicited exactly what he sought: unified outrage against Benjamin. The council's horror at genuine wickedness was guided by incomplete information toward collective punishment. Messengers rushed to Benjamin's towns, demanding the perpetrators be surrendered for justice. This represented Israel's tribal covenant functioning as intended, an internal mechanism for addressing serious crimes that threatened communal values. Benjamin faced a straightforward choice: uphold justice by delivering the guilty or defend wrongdoing through tribal solidarity. Tragically, Benjamin chose the latter. Their elders gathered, considered the demand, and issued their response: no. The tribe would not surrender its citizens, regardless of their crimes. This fateful decision transformed what might have been limited criminal justice into existential tribal conflict. Benjamin chose to define itself through the worst actions of its members rather than its higher values. This wasn't merely pragmatic protection of citizens. It represented a catastrophic moral failure. Benjamin's leadership had internalized the ethos of the Judges period. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. They placed tribal autonomy above covenant responsibility, personal loyalty above divine justice. In doing so, they forced Israel's hand toward more drastic measures. The tribal assembly at Mizpah shifted from judicial proceeding to war council. Representatives swore solemn oaths, binding themselves to unified action against Benjamin. The confederation that rarely achieved consensus found common purpose in righteous anger. 400,000 warriors assembled from 11 tribes, preparing to march against their brother tribe. One final diplomatic mission carried an ultimatum to Benjamin: surrender the perpetrators or face the consequences. Benjamin's response came not in words but in mobilization. They called up their fighting men and prepared to defend Gibeah against all of Israel combined. 26,000 Benjamite warriors, including 700 elite left-handed slingers, took defensive positions. The stage was set for tragedy, a terrible crime, an unjustifiable defense, a righteous cause that would curdle into excessive vengeance. All these elements converged in the hills of Benjamin. Israel had faced many enemies throughout the Judges period, but never before had they turned their swords against their own kin on such a scale. As battle preparations intensified, some elders surely remembered Jacob's deathbed prophecy. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. The wolf was now cornered, outnumbered, yet refusing to yield. What followed would nearly erase an entire tribe from Israel's future, a self-inflicted wound that would leave scars across generations. The first battle, Benjamin strikes back. Dawn broke over Israel's camp as warriors prepared for what many assumed would be swift justice. With overwhelming numerical advantage, 400,000 against Benjamin's 26,000, the allied tribes anticipated quick victory. Their confidence showed in their approach to Gibeah, direct and conventional, lacking the caution usually reserved for uncertain conflicts. Benjamin's fighters waited in disciplined silence. They had positioned themselves strategically around Gibeah, utilizing their intimate knowledge of the terrain. Among their ranks stood 700 elite warriors, left-handed specialists skilled with the sling, able to target with devastating accuracy. These weren't ordinary soldiers, but carefully trained fighters who could sling a stone at a hair's breadth and not miss. Israel advanced in standard formation, their massive numbers creating dust clouds visible from miles away. They had consulted God about which tribe should lead the attack and received guidance that Judah should go first. Yet something crucial was missing from their preparation: true contrition and spiritual readiness for the gravity of fighting against their brothers. The battle erupted with shocking violence. Benjamin's forces, rather than waiting behind defensive positions, launched a coordinated counterattack. They emerged from hidden ravines and brush-covered hillsides, striking Israel's front lines from multiple directions simultaneously. Their slingers released deadly volleys, each stone finding its target with terrible precision. Confusion spread through Israel's ranks as their orderly advance collapsed into chaos. Benjamin's fighters pressed their advantage, moving with the swift ferocity of their wolf emblem. By day's end, 22,000 Israelite warriors lay dead, a devastating toll that sent shockwaves through the Allied camp. The expected easy victory had become a humiliating defeat. Israel retreated in disarray, struggling to comprehend what had happened. How could Benjamin, outnumbered more than 15 to 1, inflict such damage? The allied tribes gathered at Bethel, where the Ark of the Covenant was temporarily housed. They wept before God until evening, grappling with this unexpected reversal. This time, their inquiry carried a different tone. Shall we again draw near to battle against our brothers, the sons of Benjamin? The question reflected new uncertainty. Victory no longer seemed assured despite their numerical advantage. God's answer came simply: go up against them. Morning brought renewed determination. Israel's forces reorganized, adjusted their tactics, and prepared for a second assault. They had underestimated Benjamin once. They would not make that mistake again. Yet their approach still reflected more military calculation than spiritual discernment about the true nature of this conflict. For Benjamin, the first day's victory carried dangerous consequences. Success reinforced their tragic choice to defend wrongdoing. It fueled a growing conviction that they could actually prevail against all odds, that their fighting prowess might exempt them from moral accountability. This delusion would lead them deeper into disaster. As the allied tribes returned to battle positions, Benjamin's leaders surveyed the field with dangerous confidence. Their strategy had worked perfectly. Why change it? They prepared to repeat their tactics, counting on Israel's superior numbers, to once again work against them in the narrow approaches to Gibeah. What neither side fully grasped was how this conflict differed from their usual battles against external enemies. This was brother fighting brother, a civil war with spiritual dimensions beyond tactical considerations. The wounds being inflicted would not heal with normal treaties or political settlements. Something more fundamental was being torn apart with each death. The aftermath of this first battle rippled beyond the immediate battlefield. Throughout Israel, communities received news of fallen sons, brothers, and fathers. Grief spread across the tribal territories. Some began questioning whether the campaign's cost outweighed the original crime's severity. Others hardened in their resolve, seeing the high casualties as demanding even fuller vengeance. In Benjamin's towns, initial celebration gave way to more complex emotions. Families welcomed returning warriors while preparing for the inevitable second assault. Some quietly questioned their tribe's decision to protect the guilty men of Gibeah at such cost. Others committed more deeply to tribal defense, seeing no path forward except continued resistance. Neither side could yet grasp the full tragedy unfolding before them. This wasn't merely a military conflict, but a rupture in Israel's covenant identity. The nation founded on divine promise and law had turned its weapons inward. Benjamin stood their ground behind crumbling moral walls while Israel pursued justice with increasingly vengeful hearts. Night fell over both camps. Wounded men groaned as healers worked by torchlight. Commanders planned the next day's movements. Elders offered prayers both sincere and misguided. And somewhere, the memory of a brutalized concubine, whose body had been used first by violent men and then as a call to war, faded further from focus, lost in the greater bloodshed her death had unleashed. The second battle, blood in the valley. Morning mist clung to the valleys around Gibeah as Israel's forces assembled for their second attempt. Yesterday's stunning defeat had transformed their attitude. Gone was the casual confidence, replaced by grim determination mixed with uncertainty. They had adjusted their approach, developing more sophisticated tactics against Benjamin's fierce defenders. Before advancing, Israel's warriors engaged in ritual preparation. They wept before the Lord, fasted until evening, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. These spiritual disciplines reflected growing recognition that this conflict transcended ordinary warfare. When they inquired of God, the response came as before, "Go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand." Benjamin observed these preparations from their defensive positions, drawing different conclusions. They interpreted Israel's day of prayer not as spiritual renewal, but as evidence of wavering resolve. Yesterday's victory had fostered dangerous overconfidence among Benjamin's fighters, a belief that their martial prowess could overcome any odds. The battle began with Israel appearing to implement the same direct approach as before. Benjamin's forces surged out to meet them, anticipating another rout. Initial skirmishes seemed to confirm their expectations as Israel's front lines appeared to break and retreat. Benjamin pursued eagerly, fighters streaming away from their fortified positions around Gibeah. What Benjamin failed to realize was that Israel had learned from their first defeat. This apparent retreat was actually a carefully coordinated feint, drawing Benjamin's warriors away from their strongholds. As the pursuit extended, Benjamin's forces became increasingly stretched and disorganized, their tactical advantage diminishing with each step. Despite Israel's improved strategy, Benjamin's warriors inflicted significant casualties during this phase. About 30 Israelites fell in the early fighting. These losses strengthened Benjamin's conviction that they were winning again, pulling them deeper into the trap being laid. Their initial success became the mechanism of their undoing. The fighting spread across multiple fronts, with Benjamin's smaller force increasingly dispersed. When Israel's retreat suddenly transformed into coordinated counterattacks, Benjamin found themselves overextended and vulnerable. The tide turned with stunning speed as Israel's superior numbers finally began to show their decisive advantage. By day's end, 18,000 Benjamite warriors lay dead, elite fighters who represented the tribe's martial heart. The survivors retreated in disarray, some fleeing back toward Gibeah, others scattering into the surrounding countryside. This devastating loss destroyed nearly 2/3 of Benjamin's fighting force in a single day. For Benjamin's leadership, this reversal prompted the first real questioning of their original decision. Had defending Gibeah's criminals been worth this price? Some counseled surrender, arguing that continued resistance meant tribal suicide. Others insisted retreat was impossible. Israel's battle fury suggested they now sought Benjamin's total destruction rather than merely justice for a single crime. In Israel's camp, victory brought mixed emotions. Relief at reversing their earlier defeat mingled with sobering awareness of the costs on both sides. Some warriors took grim satisfaction in avenging their fallen comrades from the first battle. Others grew increasingly troubled by the scope of bloodshed against their own kindred. The original crime in Gibeah, horrific as it was, seemed increasingly distant compared to the mounting death toll. Night fell over a transformed battlefield. Benjamin's remaining fighters consolidated around Gibeah, preparing for what many recognized might be their final stand. Their previous confidence had evaporated, replaced by desperate determination. Some performed ancient tribal rituals passed down from their ancestors, sensing they might be the last generation to practice them. Israel's forces rested and regrouped, knowing that tomorrow would bring the conflict's climax. Their superior numbers had finally proven decisive, but complete victory remained unachieved. Commanders developed plans for a final assault that would eliminate Benjamin's remaining resistance and bring the tribe to terms or to extinction. Throughout both camps, the wounded suffered through the night. Field healers worked by torchlight, binding injuries and comforting the dying. Brothers who might have shared meals at festivals now lay bleeding from each other's weapons. The landscape that had witnessed covenant ceremonies and tribal gatherings now absorbed the blood of civil war. As sunrise approached, Benjamin's remaining warriors, perhaps 7,000 men, prepared for their last defense of Gibeah. They positioned themselves on familiar ground, ready to sell their lives dearly. None could have imagined that by sunset, only a tiny remnant would remain of what had once been one of Israel's proudest tribes. The Benjaminite slaughter. The third day dawned with tension hanging heavy over the hills surrounding Gibeah. Israel's forces had implemented a complex battle plan, positioning men in hidden ambush points around the city while their main army prepared for a frontal assault. Unlike previous engagements, this attack would leave Benjamin no escape routes. Benjamin's remaining warriors, exhausted, depleted, but still defiant, took defensive positions around Gibeah. Their numbers had been catastrophically reduced over 2 days of fighting. What remained was the hardcore of their fighting force, veterans who knew they faced overwhelming odds but would not abandon their tribal identity. The battle began with familiar patterns. Israel's main force advanced toward the city, then appeared to falter and retreat, as in the previous day's engagement. Benjamin, despite having witnessed this strategy before, found themselves responding similarly. The instinct to pursue a seemingly defeated enemy proved too strong to resist. As Benjamin's fighters pursued the retreating Israelites, smoke began rising behind them. The hidden ambush forces had entered Gibeah unopposed, setting the city ablaze. When Benjamin's warriors turned to see their hometown burning, the planned retreat transformed into genuine panic. Their last stronghold was falling while they had been drawn away from its defense. Israel's forces now closed like a trap, the main army halting its retreat and counterattacking, while fresh troops emerged from hiding places to cut off escape routes. Benjamin found themselves surrounded, fighting desperately against attackers from multiple directions. The disciplined defense that had served them well in earlier battles collapsed into chaotic individual struggles for survival. The slaughter proved devastating beyond any normal conflict. When the fighting ended, 18,000 more Benjamites lay dead, described as men of valor, the tribe's finest warriors. Cities throughout Benjamin's territory stood empty or in flames. The systematic destruction extended beyond military targets to civilian infrastructure. Wells filled in, orchards cut down, homes reduced to rubble. Only 600 men of Benjamin survived this final onslaught, fleeing eastward toward the wilderness. They found refuge at the Rock of Rimmon, a remote defensible formation where they could hide from pursuit. These few represented all that remained of a tribe that had numbered more than 26,000 fighting men just days earlier. For 4 months, these survivors clung to their rocky shelter. Food came from whatever they could forage or hunt in the sparse wilderness. They lived as fugitives in their own homeland, afraid to approach their ruined settlements where Israelite forces might still patrol. Their future appeared as barren as the landscape surrounding them. In the broader tribal territories, the initial triumph over Benjamin gradually gave way to sobering reflection. As funeral pyres burned across Israel and families mourned their own losses, questions emerged about the campaign's proportionality. Had justice for one crime required virtually eliminating an entire tribe? Had righteous anger evolved into something darker? These questions intensified when representatives gathered at Mizpah to assess the conflict's aftermath. The assembled elders confronted a troubling reality. Through their own actions, one of Jacob's 12 tribes now faced extinction. Beyond the immediate bloodshed lay a deeper theological problem. God's covenant specified 12 tribes. What did it mean for Israel's identity if Benjamin disappeared? The biblical text captures their growing horror. O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? Their question reflected dawning recognition that vengeance had carried them beyond justice into potentially catastrophic territory. In pursuing righteous punishment, they had nearly destroyed part of themselves. Israel's spiritual leaders struggled to reconcile conflicting imperatives: their oath not to give their daughters as wives to Benjamin versus the covenant necessity of maintaining 12 tribes. The solution they eventually developed would prove almost as problematic as the original conflict, revealing how difficult extracting oneself from cycles of violence truly is. For the surviving Benjamites huddled at Rimmon, these theological discussions remained distant concerns. Their immediate reality was stark survival, finding enough food, maintaining watchfulness against potential attackers, and wrestling with the knowledge that their women, children, and elderly had likely perished in the systematic destruction of their towns. The third battle had transformed Benjamin from a proud, independent tribe into a broken remnant. Their territory, once bustling with towns, farms, and travelers, now lay silent and desolate. Fields once carefully tended returned to wilderness. The wolf of Jacob's prophecy had been hunted nearly to extinction, with just 600 men remaining to preserve their tribal identity. Israel had won a victory that felt increasingly hollow. Justice for the Levite's concubine had been achieved through means that raised profound questions about proportionality and collective punishment. As the nation moved from righteous anger toward troubling introspection, they confronted the challenge of how to restore what their own vengeance had nearly destroyed. Aftermath. Benjamin in ruins. Silence hung over Benjamin's territory like a shroud. Villages that once echoed with children's laughter and marketplace haggling stood empty, their charred remains slowly being reclaimed by nature. Fields lay untended, olive groves untrimmed. The absence of human activity allowed wildlife to return. Foxes denned in abandoned storerooms, birds nested in roofless homes. At the Rock of Rimmon, 600 Benjamite men created a grim semblance of community. These survivors organized hunting parties, established lookout rotations, and maintained minimal tribal structure. Their conversations avoided certain topics by unspoken agreement, particularly the fate of their women and children. Some things remained too painful to articulate. Time passed differently for these men than for the rest of Israel. Each day represented not normal life, but mere continuation, another day of exile in their own land. They developed the 1,000 small adaptations of those living on survival's edge, which plants could supplement their limited diet, how to move silently through terrain now potentially hostile, when to risk lighting fires that might be spotted from a distance. The psychological toll proved as devastating as physical hardship. These warriors had failed in their fundamental purpose, protecting their families and homes. The absence of funeral rites for fallen comrades and loved ones left grief unresolved. Dreams brought images of burning towns and separated families, causing men to wake gasping in the darkness. In wider Israel, the initial satisfaction of victory gave way to more complex emotions. As warriors returned to their homes and resumed normal lives, questions multiplied. Numerous families mourned sons lost in the campaign against Benjamin. These personal losses prompted reflection on whether such extensive bloodshed had truly been necessary. Religious leaders faced particularly difficult questions. Had Israel's response to Gibeah's crime reflected divine justice or human vengeance? What did Scripture teach about proportionality and punishment? Most troublingly, what would happen to God's covenant with 12 tribes if Benjamin disappeared completely? These theological dilemmas had no easy answers. The physical landscape itself bore witness to the conflict's severity. Travelers passing through Benjamin's territory reported eerie emptiness where bustling communities had stood. Abandoned agricultural terraces crumbled without maintenance. Roads grew increasingly difficult to traverse as nature reclaimed them. The destruction extended beyond buildings to the careful environmental management that had made the land productive. For neighboring tribes, Benjamin's absence created practical problems beyond theological concerns. The buffer zone between north and south now stood vacant, potentially allowing foreign incursions along previously protected routes. Trade patterns were disrupted, defensive arrangements compromised. Israel had inadvertently weakened itself through Benjamin's near destruction. Most concerning was the precedent established by this intertribal conflict. Israel had turned its military might against its own people with devastating thoroughness. The social contract binding the tribes together had revealed both its strength in unified action and its potential for catastrophic internal violence. This troubling lesson would echo through later tribal disputes. As months passed, Israel's elders gathered repeatedly to discuss Benjamin's fate. Their deliberations reflected growing remorse over the campaign's extent. Scripture records their lament. There must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, so that a tribe will not be blotted out from Israel. This shift from punitive fury to preservationist concern marked an important moral evolution. Meanwhile, at Rimmon, the 600 survivors developed heightened awareness of their unique position. Each man now carried responsibility not merely for his own survival, but for his entire tribal lineage. Should they die without descendants, Benjamin would disappear from Israel completely. This awareness added existential weight to their already difficult circumstances. Benjamin's plight revealed the complex interweaving of justice and mercy in covenant community. Israel had rightly condemned Gibeah's crime, but had pursued punishment beyond reasonable limits. The nation now faced the challenge of restoring what their own righteous anger had nearly destroyed. Could justice be satisfied while still preserving tribal continuity? Could Benjamin be both punished and restored? The answer would emerge through painful compromises and morally ambiguous solutions. Israel's path forward would reveal that healing from civil conflict requires more than simply ending hostilities. It demands creative approaches to rebuilding what violence has shattered. For Benjamin's survivors, watching from their wilderness refuge, these deliberations represented their only hope for tribal continuation. As smoke from distant tribal assemblies reached the Rock of Rimmon, Benjamin's remnant wondered what their future might hold. Would they remain forever outcasts, hiding at the margins of Israel's life? Or might some path emerge for them to rejoin the covenant community, scarred but still part of the national story? Their fate now rested in the hands of the very tribes that had nearly destroyed them. The oath and the dilemma. The survivors. Israel gathered at Mizpah, the same location where they had earlier sworn to punish Benjamin. Now their mood had transformed from righteous anger to troubled reflection. During the heat of conflict, they had made a solemn oath. None of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as a wife. This vow, intended to isolate wrongdoers, now threatened to complete Benjamin's destruction in a different way. 600 men remained alive, the last sons of Benjamin. Without wives, they represented a genetic dead end, a tribe with no future. The oath that had seemed righteous in the moment of judgment now appeared potentially catastrophic in its long-term implications. Israel faced a profound dilemma: how to honor their sworn word while preventing a tribe's extinction. The gravity of this situation extended beyond humanitarian concern for Benjamin's survivors. Israel's entire national identity was structured around the 12-tribe system established through Jacob's sons. Divine promises and prophetic visions reference this 12-part unity. What would it mean for God's covenant if one tribe disappeared? Would 11 tribes still constitute Israel in the fullest sense? Religious leaders pored over sacred texts, searching for precedent or principle that might guide them. They found themselves navigating unfamiliar moral territory. Their oath against Benjamin stood valid, yet allowing Benjamin's erasure seemed contrary to covenant promises. The tension between these imperatives defied simple resolution. At the Rock of Rimmon, Benjamin's survivors maintained their precarious existence, unaware of these deliberations. Their daily focus remained basic survival, finding food, keeping watch, preserving what little tribal knowledge and tradition they could through oral retelling. The future beyond immediate needs seemed too uncertain to contemplate. The assembly at Mizpah eventually identified a troubling question: had all Israel participated in the oath against Benjamin? A careful accounting revealed that Jabesh-Gilead had sent no representatives to the original assembly and thus taken no part in the punitive campaign. This technical loophole offered a potential solution, though one with disturbing moral implications. Israel's leaders made a fateful decision. Jabesh-Gilead would be punished for their non-participation, and this punishment would simultaneously address Benjamin's need for wives. 12,000 warriors marched against the unsuspecting town with orders to kill all men and non-virgin women, but to preserve 400 young virgins. These young women, taken against their will, would be given as wives to Benjamin's survivors. This solution reveals how morally compromised Israel had become during the Judges period. To solve one problem of violence, they created another. To preserve their oath against Benjamin while preventing tribal extinction, they engaged in actions against Jabesh-Gilead that mirrored aspects of what they had punished Benjamin for protecting. Representatives approached Benjamin's survivors with this proposal: return from exile and receive wives from Jabesh-Gilead, allowing their tribe to continue. The offer came without apology for the campaign that had decimated their numbers, without acknowledgement of the disproportionate destruction of their territory. It presented mere biological continuation as sufficiently restorative. Benjamin's 600 faced their own moral quandary. The women of Jabesh-Gilead were essentially captives, taken in violence and offered as breeding stock rather than partners. Accepting them meant participating in this troubling arrangement. Yet refusing meant tribal extinction, the end of their lineage, their history, their place in Israel's covenant story. With few real alternatives, Benjamin accepted. 400 men received wives from Jabesh Gilead, leaving 200 still without partners. They began the slow process of returning to their ruined territory, establishing rudimentary settlements amid the destruction, and attempting to rebuild something resembling normal life. For the young women involved, the arrangement represented profound trauma. Families killed, homes destroyed, then forced marriage to men from a tribe known for defending sexual violence. Scripture maintains disturbing silence about their experiences, focusing instead on the mechanical solution to tribal continuation. This silence itself speaks volumes about the moral bankruptcy of the period. The remaining 200 Benjamite men still needed wives, and Israel's leaders developed yet another morally questionable plan to avoid breaking their oath while addressing this need. Their solution would involve manipulation of religious festival traditions and effectively sanctioned abduction, revealing how far Israel had drifted from covenant ethics during this chaotic period. Throughout these developments, no voice in leadership appears to have questioned the fundamental premise that biological continuation of tribal lineage justified extreme measures. The focus remained narrowly on preserving the 12-tribe structure without adequate concern for the human costs or ethical compromises involved. What happened at Mizpah and afterward reveals the moral confusion of Israel's darkest period. When sacred oaths conflict with covenant continuity, when justice requires mercy to remain truly just, when solutions to one wrong create new wrongs, these complexities expose the inadequacy of human wisdom without divine guidance. The partial restoration of Benjamin would proceed through morally compromised means, leaving wounds that would remain unhealed for generations. The tribe would eventually rebuild, but the psychological and spiritual damage inflicted during this period would shape their development in ways both obvious and subtle for centuries to come. The abduction at Shiloh, the dark solution. The elders of Israel faced a troubling dilemma. Only 600 Benjaminite men remained alive, hiding at the rock of Rimmon. Their homes lay in ashes, their families gone, and their future hanging by a thread. The other tribes had sworn a solemn oath at Mizpah, "None of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as a wife." This vow, made in righteous anger, now threatened to erase an entire tribe from Israel's family tree. Under the shade of ancient oaks, the leaders gathered at Bethel. Tears flowed as they questioned their harsh judgment. "How can one tribe be missing from Israel today?" they lamented. Their victory over Benjamin had turned bitter. The 12 tribes, meant to stand together as brothers, now faced the prospect of becoming 11. The survivors at Rimmon couldn't take wives from other Israelite tribes because of the oath. Foreign marriages stood forbidden by ancient custom and divine law. Without wives, the tribe would vanish within a generation, their lands empty, their name forgotten. The elders searched desperately for a solution that would preserve Benjamin without breaking their vow. Someone recalled another oath made during the assembly. Anyone who failed to join the fight against Benjamin would face death. A count revealed the people of Jabesh Gilead had sent no warriors to the battle. This absence now presented a terrible opportunity. A force of 12,000 soldiers marched against unsuspecting Jabesh Gilead. The attack came swift and merciless. Every man and married woman fell to the sword, while 400 young virgins were spared and taken captive. These girls, innocent of their city's choice not to fight Benjamin, would become unwilling saviors of a condemned tribe. The elders sent messengers to the men at Rimmon, offering peace and return. The Benjaminites emerged from their rocky fortress, gaunt and wary after months of hiding. They received the young women of Jabesh Gilead as wives, a gift born of blood. Yet 400 wives could not suffice for 600 men. 200 Benjaminites remained without partners, their line threatened with extinction. The elders devised another disturbing plan, one that skirted the edges of their oath without technically breaking it. The annual festival at Shiloh approached, where young women danced in the vineyards. The remaining Benjaminite men received unusual instructions: hide among the vines and watch for the dancers. When the moment seemed right, each man should rush out, seize a young woman, and carry her back to Benjamin's territory. When the festival day arrived, the fields around Shiloh bloomed with color and sound. Young women twirled in celebration, unaware of the eyes watching from shadowed places. At a signal, the hiding men burst forth. Cries of alarm split the air as 200 daughters of Shiloh found themselves carried away to a strange land. Fathers and brothers from Shiloh stormed to the elders, demanding justice. The leaders offered cold comfort. Be kind to Benjamin, for we did not get wives for each of them in the war, and you are not guilty, since you did not give your daughters to them, they were taken. With these abductions, Benjamin's survival found purchase in soil soaked with tears. The tribe would live on, but at what cost? Marriages built on violence, communities seated in trauma, families born of desperation. The dancers of Shiloh became reluctant mothers to a tribe reborn from ashes. The Benjaminites returned to their ruined inheritance with their new wives. They rebuilt cities from scorched stones, planted fields in soil mixed with ancestors' blood, and raised children in the shadow of their fathers' sins. A tribe nearly erased now clung to existence through methods mirroring the very crimes that had nearly destroyed them. The other tribes watched this rebirth with mixed emotions: relief that Israel remained whole, but discomfort at the means. The story of Benjamin's survival became a whispered warning passed down through generations. Justice without mercy leads to new injustice, and desperate men will break any moral boundary to survive. As years passed, the wounds slowly healed. Children grew who knew nothing of the war, the Rimmon refuge, or the abductions. These innocent ones, half Benjaminite, half captive, carried forward a troubled legacy while building something new. Their blood united former enemies, creating bonds stronger than oaths or anger. Israel had nearly sacrificed one of its own tribes on the altar of justice. Benjamin had nearly perished for refusing to sacrifice its own. Now, through means neither side could proudly claim, the family of Jacob remained complete. 12 tribes would continue, their destinies intertwined, despite the blood between them. The dark solution at Shiloh closed one chapter of Benjamin's story, but the echoes would reverberate through generations to come, shaping the tribe's identity and place within Israel. A people who had faced extinction would never again take their existence for granted, nor forget how close they had come to oblivion. Benjamin reborn. The rebuilding years. Morning mist hung over the valleys of Benjamin's territory. Where smoke once billowed from burning cities, now cooking fires sent gentle plumes skyward. The land, scarred by war only a generation before, slowly healed under caring hands. Benjamin was reborn, different but alive. The 600 survivors and their wives became the foundation for a new beginning. Their first task, shelter. Temporary camps gave way to permanent dwellings as families claimed ancestral lands. Stone by stone, they rebuilt what fire had consumed. Cities rose from ruins: Gibeah, Ramah, Mizpah, names once associated with shame, now symbols of resilience. Children's laughter, absent for many seasons, returned to Benjamin's hills. The first generation born after the war grew up hearing whispered stories of past glories and recent horrors. These children carried a mixed heritage: Benjaminite fathers and mothers from Jabesh Gilead or Shiloh. Their blood united former enemies, creating something new from tragedy. Farmland, left untended during the conflict, required enormous effort to reclaim. Weeds and wildlife had reclaimed fields where grain once grew. The reduced population meant fewer hands for labor, so Benjaminites adapted. They worked longer days, developed efficient methods, and focused on crops that yielded most from limited resources. Neighboring tribes watched Benjamin's rebirth with caution. The oath of Mizpah technically fulfilled, interactions slowly resumed. Trade relations reopened along ancient routes. Border disputes, once settled with bloodshed, now found resolution through negotiation. A fragile trust took root where hatred had flourished. Benjamin's warriors, once feared for their precision with sling and sword, diminished in number but not spirit. The trauma of defeat tempered their famous aggression. They formed defensive units to protect rebuilding efforts rather than raiding parties. Their reputation shifted from ferocious fighters to vigilant guardians. Religious life centered around local altars until pilgrimages to Shiloh cautiously resumed. For many Benjaminite men, returning to Shiloh stirred complicated emotions. The site where they had seized wives now hosted their worship. Some women never overcame their trauma, refusing to participate in festivals. Others found healing through community and faith. The tribe developed a distinct identity shaped by near extinction. Stories passed down emphasized survival against overwhelming odds. Children learned of Jacob's prophecy, Benjamin as a ravenous wolf, with new understanding. The wolf had been hunted to the edge of extinction, but endured. This narrative of resilience became central to Benjaminite self-perception. Family structures evolved differently in Benjamin than other tribes. With populations so precious, elders discouraged dangerous occupations. Children received special protection. Large families became the highest aspiration, ensuring the tribe's continued existence. Multiple generations lived together, preserving oral history and tradition. Skilled craftsmanship flourished during rebuilding. Necessity birthed innovation in construction techniques. Benjaminite stonemasons gained renown for their ability to repurpose damaged materials. Pottery styles developed distinctive patterns, often incorporating wolf imagery, a reclaiming of Jacob's prophecy as a symbol of strength rather than savagery. Political power gradually shifted within the tribe. The families who could trace unbroken lineage to before the war claimed special status, yet leadership fell mainly to those who guided successful rebuilding efforts. Merit increasingly outweighed birth in a community where every person's contribution meant survival. Benjamin's position between Judah and Ephraim, the territory straddling north and south, gained new importance as tribal divisions deepened across Israel. Their lands formed a natural bridge between regions growing culturally distinct. Benjaminites served as translators, diplomats, and traders across these emerging boundaries. As decades passed, population recovered. Villages expanded into towns. Markets bustled where once only wild animals roamed abandoned streets. New generations arose who knew the war as history rather than memory. Yet the lessons remained, embedded in customs, reflected in cautious diplomacy with other tribes, visible in the fierce protection of their identity. The story of Benjamin transformed from one of shame to one of endurance. A tribe that had stood alone against all Israel, fallen to just 600 men, then rebuilt from ashes. This narrative inspired respect, even from former enemies. The wolf had returned to prowl its territory, not with the same ferocity as before, but with watchful wisdom earned through suffering. From this reborn tribe would come unexpected greatness. The seeds of future power took root in humble rebuilding. As Benjamin's cities flourished once more, few could imagine that from this smallest, most wounded tribe would arise Israel's first king, a tall, impressive figure who would transform the scattered tribes into a united kingdom. Saul, the first king of Israel. On the rolling hills of Benjamin's territory stood a simple farmhouse belonging to Kish, a man of wealth and respect. His son Saul towered above others, handsome, strong, and modest. No one, least of all Saul himself, imagined this young Benjaminite would become Israel's first king. A tribe once nearly erased would soon provide the leader who would unite all 12 under one crown. The times demanded change. Philistine armies pressed from coastal regions. Raiders struck from east and south. The system of occasional judges no longer protected the people. Tribal elders journeyed to the aging prophet Samuel, demanding, "Give us a king to judge us like other nations." Though reluctant, Samuel received divine permission to grant their wish. Saul's path to kingship began with missing donkeys. Searching for his father's lost animals, he sought guidance from Samuel. Instead of directions to straying livestock, he received sacred oil poured upon his head. The humble Benjaminite protested, "Am I not from the smallest tribe of Israel? Why speak to me this way?" Yet destiny had chosen him. News spread through Israel's territories. A king had been selected from Benjamin. Many welcomed the announcement with celebration. Others questioned how a tribe so recently disgraced could provide leadership. Some from larger, wealthier tribes refused to bring gifts to the new king, muttering, "How can this man save us?" Saul proved them wrong at Jabesh Gilead, ironically, the same city whose daughters had once saved Benjamin from extinction. When Ammonite forces threatened to gouge out the right eye of every man in the city, Saul butchered a yoke of oxen, sending the pieces throughout Israel with a warning: join the fight or face similar treatment. The tribes united under his command, crushing the Ammonite threat. Victory transformed Saul from questioned leader to celebrated warrior king. Samuel conducted a public coronation at Gilgal, where the people shouted support. The Benjaminite shepherd became Israel's shield. He established his capital at Gibeah, the very city whose sin had nearly destroyed his tribe. From ruins rose a royal compound, symbolizing Benjamin's astonishing reversal of fortune. Saul assembled Israel's first standing army with his son Jonathan as a commander. Military success followed against Moabites, Edomites, and Philistines. The king's early reign brought security unknown for generations. Trade routes opened, markets flourished, and for a brief golden period, the experiment of monarchy seemed divinely blessed. Yet shadows gathered in Saul's mind. The responsibility of kingship weighed heavily upon him. Samuel's continuing spiritual authority created tension. Prophet and king frequently disagreed about governance. Most significantly, Saul struggled with obedience to divine commands, repeatedly following his own judgment instead of prophetic instruction. The breaking point came during a campaign against the Amalekites. Samuel delivered clear orders to destroy everything. Saul, seeing value in captured livestock and wanting to make a grand sacrifice, preserved the best animals. When confronted by Samuel, he offered excuses rather than repentance. The prophet's response cut deep. The Lord has rejected you from being king. Though Saul remained on the throne, divine favor shifted to an unlikely successor, a shepherd boy from Judah named David. Brought to court to soothe the king's increasing melancholy with music, David soon displayed military prowess that both impressed and threatened Saul. The king's mind darkened with suspicion, jealousy, and eventually violent rage. Benjaminites rallied around their troubled king. They remembered their near extinction and saw in Saul their tribe's redemption. His success validated their survival. Many viewed David as a threat not just to Saul, but to Benjamin's restored position. Court officials, mostly fellow tribesmen, fed the king's paranoia about David's ambitions. Saul's mental decline accelerated. Episodes of murderous fury alternated with periods of deep regret. He hurled spears at David during music performances. He ordered the massacre of priests suspected of helping his perceived rival. The generous, humble man who had reluctantly accepted kingship transformed into a tormented tyrant obsessed with maintaining power. Military focus shifted from external enemies to hunting David. Resources that should have defended Israel instead pursued an innocent man through wilderness regions. Meanwhile, Philistine forces regained strength, preparing for campaigns against a divided Israel. The unity Saul had initially created crumbled under his increasingly erratic leadership. Loyal Benjaminites stood by their king despite his decline. They remembered when their tribe faced extinction and how far they had risen. To abandon Saul meant potentially losing everything they had rebuilt. A small contingent of Benjaminites did join David's band of outcasts, creating bitter divisions within families and communities. Saul's tragic reign ended on Mount Gilboa. Surrounded by Philistine forces, his sons fallen in battle, the wounded king fell on his own sword rather than face capture. News of his death spread grief throughout Benjamin. Their rise to power had ended as suddenly as it began. The crown would pass to David, not of their tribe, and Benjamin's brief moment of supremacy would close. Yet Saul's legacy endured. He created the foundation of Israelite monarchy. He established governmental structures that David would later expand. Most importantly for Benjamin, he restored his tribe's honor. From near extinction to producing Israel's first king, the transformation was remarkable. Though Saul's personal story ended in tragedy, his reign marked Benjamin's complete rehabilitation among the tribes of Israel. David vs. Saul. Tribal divisions. Dawn broke over the wilderness of Judah. A band of outlaws huddled around small fires, alert for approaching danger. Among them stood David, poet, warrior, and anointed future king, driven from Saul's court and hunting from cave to cave. This conflict between David and Saul ran deeper than personal rivalry. It exposed tribal divisions that had simmered beneath the surface of Israelite society for generations. Benjamin stood firmly behind their king. The smallest tribe had tasted power and influence under Saul's reign. Royal appointments filled their ranks. Their territory hosted the capital. After generations of rebuilding from near extinction, Benjaminites saw in Saul their tribal vindication. To them, David represented a threat not just to their king, but to their hard-won position among the tribes. From Saul's perspective, David embodied multiple threats. Here was a charismatic Judahite winning popular acclaim through military victories. Samuel had already hinted at divine rejection in favor of a better man, when crowds chanted, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s." The king's paranoia found justification. What began as admiration for the young warrior curdled into deadly jealousy. The royal court divided into factions. Jonathan, Saul's son and heir, formed an unlikely friendship with David, a bond that transcended tribal loyalty. Michal, the king's daughter, became David's wife, then helped him escape her father's murderous rage. Most court officials, predominantly Benjaminites, fueled Saul's suspicions with reports and rumors about David's growing popularity. David's flight from court transformed political tension into open division. Men from various tribes, mostly dissatisfied with Saul's increasingly erratic rule, gathered around the charismatic fugitive. Most came from Judah, his home tribe, but others joined from Benjamin, Gad, and Manasseh. Each defection from Benjamin particularly enraged Saul, who viewed it as personal betrayal. The town of Nob suffered horrific consequences for these divisions. When priests there unknowingly assisted the fleeing David, Saul ordered a massacre. 85 religious leaders died by the sword. Only Abiathar escaped to join David's band. This atrocity shocked Israel. Their anointed king had slaughtered priests over political suspicion. For many, it confirmed the divine rejection Samuel had pronounced. Ordinary Benjaminites faced impossible choices. Supporting Saul meant loyalty to their tribe and chosen king, yet his declining mental state and cruel actions troubled even devoted followers. Those with connections to David's supporters lived in fear of royal vengeance. Family bonds strained as relatives took opposing sides. Some secretly aided David while publicly professing loyalty to Saul. David's approach to this conflict revealed his political wisdom. Twice he spared Saul's life when opportunity arose, once in a cave at Engedi, later while the king slept among his troops. Each time, David publicly proclaimed his restraint, undermining accusations that he sought the throne through violence. He demonstrated respect for the Lord's anointed while building his reputation as an honorable alternative to the increasingly unstable king. The conflict's geographic dimension highlighted tribal boundaries. Saul controlled the central hill country, including Benjamin's territory and much of Ephraim. David found refuge mainly in southern wilderness regions of Judah, near his hometown of Bethlehem. This north-south division foreshadowed the eventual split of the kingdom after Solomon's death. Philistine leaders watched Israel's internal strife with strategic interest. They exploited divisions by raiding unprotected towns while Saul's forces pursued David. Eventually, David and his followers sought refuge in Philistine territory, a controversial move that further complicated tribal loyalties. To some Israelites, this apparent alliance with enemies confirmed David as a traitor. Others recognized it as necessary survival. Economic impacts spread throughout the tribes. Trade declined as traveling merchants faced dangers from both royal forces and various outlaws claiming political motivation. Agricultural production suffered when farmers were conscripted into Saul's pursuit forces. Resources that should have improved the kingdom instead funded an increasingly personal vendetta. Religious leadership split along similar lines. Most priests, after the Nob massacre, feared Saul and quietly supported David. The sacred ephod traveled with Abiathar in David's camp rather than remaining with the king. This religious dimension added divine legitimacy to David's cause while suggesting heaven's abandonment of Saul, perceptions that influenced ordinary Israelites caught between loyalties. The conflict reached its tragic conclusion on Mount Gilboa. Philistine forces, strengthened during Israel's internal fighting, launched a major offensive. Saul and 3 sons, including the noble Jonathan, fell in battle. David's public lamentation for his friend and even for his persecutor, "How the mighty have fallen," showed genuine grief rather than political calculation. With Saul's death, most expected immediate unity under David. Instead, tribal divisions deepened. Abner, Saul's military commander, installed Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son, as king over northern tribes, including Benjamin. David ruled only Judah from Hebron. For 7 years, Israel existed as 2 kingdoms, a situation that would repeat centuries later with far more permanence. The struggle between David and Saul transcended personal conflict. It represented competing visions for Israel's future, tribal rivalries with ancient roots, and questions about divine selection of leadership. Benjamin, having tasted both near extinction and royal power within one generation, would never view the other tribes with simple trust again. These divisions, temporarily healed under David's eventual united monarchy, would resurface repeatedly throughout Israel's turbulent history. The Loyal Prince. In the shadow of King Saul's growing madness, a light shone bright in the royal court. His son Jonathan, a man whose heart proved greater than his birthright. Born into the tribe of Benjamin, Jonathan emerged as a warrior whose courage matched his kindness. His first battle, fought against a Philistine outpost, revealed both his bravery and trust in God's power rather than military might. Yet Jonathan's story finds its true heart not in war, but in friendship. When a young shepherd named David entered the royal courts, few could have imagined the bond that would form between the king's son and this newcomer. Their souls connected in a way that transcended position and power. Jonathan, heir to the throne, embraced the very man prophesied to replace his family's dynasty. Their friendship bloomed against impossible odds. As Saul's jealousy of David grew into murderous rage, Jonathan stood at a crossroads no son should face. His father demanded loyalty, yet his heart recognized David's divine calling. When Saul hurled his spear at David during a palace feast, it was Jonathan who warned his friend to flee into the night. In a quiet grove outside the city, Jonathan and David sealed their friendship with a covenant, promising to protect each other's families regardless of who might rule Israel. With tears staining their faces, they embraced one last time, knowing their paths must separate. Jonathan to honor his father, David to survive in exile. Word reached the palace of David's growing band of followers in the wilderness. Each day, Saul's mood darkened, while Jonathan carried the weight of divided loyalties. At meals, he defended his absent friend, facing his father's wrath with quiet dignity. "Why should David die?" he asked Saul. "What has he done?" In response, the king hurled his spear not at an absent enemy, but at his own son. Jonathan's last gift to David came through a simple warning, arrows shot beyond a waiting boy, a secret signal that danger remained too great for return. Their final moments together held the sorrow of what could never be, a king and his loyal friend ruling side by side. "Go in peace," Jonathan told David. "The Lord is witness of the bond between us and our children forever." As the Philistine armies gathered at Mount Gilboa, Jonathan stood beside his troubled father one final time. Though knowing Israel's doom approached, his courage never wavered. The battle swirled in chaos around them until arrows found their mark in Jonathan's body. He fell not far from his father, loyal to the end. When news reached David of Jonathan's death, he tore his clothes in grief, composing a lament that echoed across the hills. "How the mighty have fallen in battle! Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women." In Jonathan, the tribe of Benjamin offered Israel its noblest son, a prince who valued truth above power and friendship above ambition. His legacy lives not in conquered lands or gathered wealth, but in showing how loyalty, when rooted in God's purposes, transcends the boundaries of family and tribal identity. The end of Saul, a tribe in turmoil. Dark clouds gathered over King Saul's final days. The once promising ruler now wandered his palace halls in fear, tormented by an evil spirit and the knowledge that God's favor had passed to another. The prophet Samuel, who had anointed him king, was dead. The Philistines pressed ever closer to the heart of Israel's territory. In his desperation, Saul crossed a boundary he once defended. Though he had banned all mediums and spiritists from the land, the king now disguised himself and sought the witch of Endor. "Bring up Samuel," he begged the woman. When Samuel's spirit appeared, his message brought no comfort. "Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will hand over both Israel and you to the Philistines." Morning broke over Mount Gilboa with the clash of armies. Philistine chariots charged across the valley floor while Israelite warriors formed their lines upon the slopes. The men of Benjamin fought fiercely around their king, but the tide of battle turned against them. One by one, Saul watched his sons fall: Abinadab, Malchishua, and finally Jonathan, the best of them all. As enemy archers closed in, their arrows found the king. Wounded and fearing capture, Saul turned to his armor-bearer. Draw your sword and run me through." When the young Benjaminite refused, Saul fell upon his own sword, choosing death over humiliation at Philistine hands. The armor-bearer, seeing his master dead, took his own life as well. News spread rapidly across the land. Saul and his sons were dead, their bodies hung in disgrace upon the walls of Beth Shan. The northern towns emptied as people fled the advancing Philistines. Yet from Jabesh Gilead came a band of brave men, remembering how Saul had once saved their city. Under cover of darkness, they recovered the royal bodies and gave them proper burial beneath a tamarisk tree. For the tribe of Benjamin, Saul's death opened wounds deeper than grief. Their first king lay dead, their warriors scattered, their lands vulnerable to enemy raids. More troubling still was the knowledge that David, the anointed successor, came from Judah, their historic rival. Would Benjamin's brief moment of glory fade into memory as power shifted south? Survivors gathered in hushed circles, remembering how their tribe had once before faced extinction after the war at Gibeah. Some wondered if divine judgment had found them again. Others clung to hope in Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son, who might yet preserve their place in Israel's story. As Benjamin mourned, a deeper tension spread across Israel. The nation stood divided, the southern tribes looking to David, the northern regions, including Benjamin, remaining loyal to Saul's house. The seeds of civil war, planted during Saul's paranoid pursuit of David, now sprouted in blood-soaked soil. In village gatherings, old men reminded younger Benjaminites of Jacob's ancient prophecy. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, in the evening he divides the plunder. Their tribe had indeed risen to power under Saul, but now evening shadows fell across their future. Would they fade into history or find a way to preserve their identity in a changing Israel? Saul's tragic end marked more than a king's death. It symbolized a crossroads for his entire tribe. Having tasted leadership only to see it slip away, Benjamin faced the painful task of reimagining its place in a nation rapidly moving beyond its influence. Their response would shape Israel's future for generations to come. David's ascendancy. Benjamin in the shadows. David received news of Saul's death while sheltering in Ziklag among the Philistines. Rather than rejoice at his enemy's fall, he tore his clothes in genuine grief. The messenger who brought Saul's crown, expecting reward, instead met justice at David's command for claiming to have killed the Lord's anointed. Following God's guidance, David moved his family and followers to Hebron in Judah. There, the elders of his home tribe anointed him king, but only over Judah. The northern territories, including Benjamin, remained hesitant to accept a ruler from outside their regions. Meanwhile, in the north, Abner, Saul's powerful general, acted decisively to preserve the royal legacy. He took Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son, across the Jordan to Mahanaim and declared him king over the remaining tribes. Though lacking his father's stature or divine calling, Ishbosheth provided a rallying point for those loyal to Saul's memory, especially among his fellow Benjaminites. For the people of Benjamin, this divided kingdom mirrored their internal conflict. Their lands sat at the border between David's southern realm and Ishbosheth's northern territories. Some families found themselves torn, brothers serving different kings, cousins becoming political enemies. Their tribe's identity, so recently elevated through Saul's kingship, now hung in uncertain balance. In Benjaminite villages, mothers warned their sons against traveling too far south, while fathers spoke in hushed tones about which king truly held God's favor. The tribal elders found themselves caught between loyalty to Saul's bloodline and the growing recognition that David's star continued to rise. Abner, though serving Ishbosheth, remained the true power behind the northern throne. This battle-hardened Benjaminite commander understood political reality better than his young king. For 2 years, an uneasy peace held between the rival kingdoms, punctuated by minor skirmishes along their borders. Among these border clashes, a fateful encounter unfolded at the Pool of Gibeon in Benjamin's territory. Abner's men met Joab's troops, David's commander and nephew, in what began as a controlled contest between champions but exploded into bloody battle. When the dust settled, Asahel, Joab's brother, lay dead by Abner's hand. As power gradually shifted toward David, Benjamin found itself increasingly isolated. The tribe watched nervously as other northern regions began questioning Ishbosheth's leadership. When Abner himself quarreled with the king over a concubine and opened secret negotiations with David, many Benjaminites sensed their position weakening further. Abner's assassination by Joab, an act of personal vengeance disguised as loyalty to David, removed the last strong supporter of Saul's house. Soon after, Ishbosheth met his end at the hands of two Benjaminite captains who mistakenly thought David would reward their treachery. Instead, he executed them for killing God's anointed ruler. With Ishbosheth's death, Benjamin lost its royal connection and faced an uncomfortable reality: accepting leadership from Judah or standing alone against growing consensus. Practical minds among them recognized the inevitable. When representatives from all tribes gathered at Hebron to offer David the unified crown, Benjamin stood among them, not leading as before, but following where circumstances led. Civil War. David versus Ishbosheth. The land of Israel lay divided, a kingdom torn in two by loyalty and ambition. In the south, David ruled from Hebron over his home tribe of Judah. In the north, Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son, claimed the throne over the remaining tribes, including Benjamin. This fragile arrangement could not last in a land meant to be united under God's chosen king. The first sparks of conflict ignited at Gibeon, a Benjaminite town where the waters reflected a cloudless sky. Abner, commander of Ishbosheth's forces, suggested a contest between 12 champions from each side. What began as controlled combat quickly descended into chaos. "Let the young men arise and play before us," Abner had said, but their game ended with each man grasping his opponent's head, thrusting daggers into enemy sides until all 24 lay dead. Full battle erupted immediately. Abner's northern forces fell back before David's men led by Joab. As they retreated, Asahel, Joab's swift-footed brother, pursued Abner relentlessly. Despite warnings to turn aside, the young warrior pressed forward until Abner's spear found his belly, leaving him dying on the path. By day's end, 20 of David's men lay dead, while Ishbosheth's forces lost 360. This clash marked only the beginning of a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. Across Benjamin's rolling hills, families found themselves caught between competing loyalties, to Saul's memory or David's growing power. Village elders counseled caution, while young warriors chose sides, sometimes brother against brother. For Benjamin, this war cut deeper than for other tribes. Their land formed the battlefield where most clashes occurred, their crops trampled by passing armies, their wells drained by thirsty soldiers. More painful still was the knowledge that each victory for David diminished their tribe's recent prominence under Saul. As months passed, a subtle shift occurred in the conflict. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Abner, the true power behind Ishbosheth's throne, found himself increasingly isolated as more families switched allegiance to David. When Ishbosheth accused him of sleeping with Saul's concubine, a claim to royal power, the general's patience snapped. "Am I a dog's head belonging to Judah?" Abner demanded of his king. "Today I show kindness to the house of Saul, yet you accuse me concerning this woman." Secretly, Abner began negotiations with David, offering to bring all Israel under his rule in exchange for protection. Word of Abner's planned defection spread quietly among Benjaminite leaders. Some viewed it as betrayal, while others recognized political necessity. Before this transition could occur, however, tragedy struck. Joab, still burning with vengeance for his brother's death, lured Abner aside at Hebron's gate and stabbed him in the stomach, mimicking Asahel's wound. David publicly mourned Abner, walking behind his bier and fasting until sunset. This gesture impressed many northerners, including doubtful Benjaminites who had feared harsh treatment under Judah's rule. Yet without Abner's steady hand, Ishbosheth's kingdom quickly unraveled. The final blow came from an unexpected quarter. Two Benjaminite captains, Baanah and Rechab, seeking favor with the ascendant king, entered Ishbosheth's house while he napped in midday heat. They murdered him in his bed, beheaded him, and traveled through the night to present this grisly trophy to David at Hebron. "As surely as the Lord lives," David responded, "when someone told me Saul is dead, thinking he brought good news, I seized him and put him to death at Ziklag. How much more should I deal with wicked men who kill an innocent person in his own house and on his own bed?" The assassins met swift justice, their hands and feet cut off, their bodies hung beside Hebron's pool. With Ishbosheth's death, the civil war ended, not with a decisive battle, but a quiet surrender of alternatives. For Benjamin, this closure brought mixed emotions: relief that bloodshed had ceased, yet sorrow that their brief moment of national leadership had passed. Now they would need to find their place in David's united kingdom. The reign of David, Benjamin's survival. Beneath an ancient oak at Hebron, elders from all 12 tribes gathered around David. "We are your bone and flesh," they declared, placing their hands upon the horn of oil as he was anointed king over all Israel. Among them stood Benjaminite leaders, men who once served Saul but now pledged loyalty to the shepherd king from Judah. For Benjamin, this transition required swallowing bitter pride. Their tribe had briefly known the sweetness of power under Saul, only to watch it slip away like water through cupped hands. Now they faced a choice: resist the inevitable and face destruction, or adapt to changing times and find a new purpose within David's kingdom. Wisely, David understood their struggle. His first acts as unified king included gestures of reconciliation toward Saul's family. He restored land to Mephibosheth, Jonathan's crippled son, bringing him to dine regularly at the royal table. This kindness, honoring his covenant with Jonathan, signaled to all Benjaminites that vengeance would not be his policy. Jerusalem, a Jebusite stronghold on the border between Judah and Benjamin, became David's brilliant choice for a new capital. Neither fully in Judah nor Benjamin, this neutral city could unite north and south without favoring either. When David's warriors captured its seemingly impregnable fortress, he renamed it the City of David while respecting its position as partially within Benjamin's territory. From this central location, David organized his government with surprising inclusiveness. Though his close advisors included many from his days as a fugitive, he appointed men from northern tribes, including Benjamin, to positions of influence. Shemiah the Benjaminite joined his council, while others found places in the expanding bureaucracy needed to govern a growing kingdom. Military success further cemented national unity. As the Philistines launched fresh attacks, David met them not as a tribal leader, but as Israel's king. Benjaminite archers and slingers fought alongside Judahite spearmen, their shared victories healing old wounds. When David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem with dancing and celebration, Benjaminites joined the procession, recognizing God's hand in these events. Not all accepted this new reality. When David fled Jerusalem during Absalom's rebellion, Shimei, a relative of Saul from the clan of Benjamin, cursed him openly, throwing stones and dust while calling him a man of blood. This outburst revealed lingering resentment among some who still viewed David as a usurper of Benjamin's rightful place. Yet, even this bitter moment ultimately demonstrated David's wisdom in handling tribal tensions. Though his warriors wanted to execute Shimei on the spot, David stayed their hands. Later, upon returning to Jerusalem victorious, he forgave the Benjaminites' offense, understanding that showing mercy would do more to secure peace than harsh punishment. As David's reign progressed, Benjamin found unexpected opportunities to thrive. Their strategic location near the capital brought economic benefits through trade and royal building projects. Their warriors gained reputation in the king's armies, particularly the elite forces. Gradually, many Benjaminites shifted from reluctant subjects to proud citizens of a united Israel. When another Benjaminite named Sheba attempted rebellion, blowing his trumpet and calling, "We have no share in David, no part in Jesse's son," he found little support among his tribesmen. Most recognized that their future lay not in clinging to past glory, but in contributing their unique strengths to Israel's shared destiny. David's 40-year reign transformed Benjamin from defeated rival to essential partner in building the nation. Though they no longer held the throne, their territory, traditions, and talents remained vital to Israel's identity. In learning to thrive from the second position rather than demanding first place, Benjamin discovered a resilience that would serve them well through coming centuries of challenge. The census and the plague, a divine punishment. The idea came to David near the end of his reign: count the fighting men throughout Israel. Perhaps pride whispered this thought, or anxiety about succession, or simply a king's desire to measure his strength. Whatever the cause, Joab objected immediately. May the Lord multiply his troops 100 times over, but why does my lord the king want to do such a thing? Despite these concerns, royal counters set out through the land from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south. For 9 months and 20 days, they recorded names and numbers in every village and town. When they reached Benjamin's territory, many elders recalled how God had punished Israel after previous censuses. Some provided names reluctantly, sensing something amiss in this accounting of human strength without divine command. The counters returned with impressive figures: 800,000 fighting men in Israel and 500,000 in Judah. Within these numbers, Benjamin contributed tens of thousands of skilled warriors. Yet as David heard the final tally, his heart troubled him. What began as administrative ambition ended in spiritual regret. "I have sinned greatly in what I have done," he confessed to God. "Now, please take away the guilt of your servant. I have done a very foolish thing." Through the prophet Gad, God offered David 3 choices of punishment: 3 years of famine, 3 months of fleeing before enemies, or 3 days of plague throughout the land. The king chose the briefest option, saying, "Let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but do not let me fall into human hands." Morning broke with the sound of weeping. From Dan to Beersheba, people woke to find loved ones burning with fever, their skin marked with signs of disease. The angel of death moved invisibly through villages and towns, claiming 70,000 lives across Israel. Benjamin's towns, clustered near Jerusalem, watched in horror as the plague advanced toward them like an unstoppable tide. At the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, on Mount Moriah overlooking Jerusalem, the angel paused with sword extended over the city. David, wearing sackcloth, saw this terrifying vision and fell face down, crying out, "I am the one who has sinned and done wrong. These are but sheep. What have they done? Let your hand fall upon me and my family." God commanded David through the prophet Gad to build an altar on that very threshing floor. When Araunah offered to give David the site and sacrificial animals without cost, the king refused. "I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing." He purchased the threshing floor for 50 shekels of silver, built the altar, and offered sacrifices. As smoke rose from the altar, the plague stopped. The angel's sword returned to its sheath. Across Benjamin's hills and valleys, families counted their losses while giving thanks for those spared. This threshing floor, partly within Benjamin's traditional territory, would later become the site of Solomon's temple, a permanent reminder of both divine judgment and mercy. For Benjamin, this event carried special significance. The plague had struck hardest in densely populated areas, including their towns surrounding Jerusalem. Many families lost fathers, sons, and brothers, warriors recently counted in the king's census. These losses reopened wounds barely healed from the Civil War years earlier. Yet amid grief came a powerful lesson. The tribe that once prided itself on military prowess now witnessed how quickly human strength could vanish before divine judgment. Warriors who survived recognized their dependence on God's protection rather than their own skill with sword or sling. In village gatherings, Benjaminite elders reflected on how their tribe's story repeatedly demonstrated this truth. They had nearly been extinguished after Gibeah's sin, had risen to royal power under Saul, only to fall again, and now had watched disease claim many of their mighty men. Each time, survival came not through human strength, but divine mercy. As David prepared to pass his crown to Solomon, this humbling experience shaped Benjamin's approach to the transition. Rather than grasping for fading glory or resisting the Davidic dynasty, many embraced their role within the larger nation. The threshing floor where death had stopped, soon to become the Temple Mount, stood partly on their soil, a permanent reminder that their identity now bound them to something greater than tribal ambition. The Rebellion of Sheba, a Benjaminite uprising. The embers of tribal resentment never fully cooled. Even as David returned to Jerusalem after quelling Absalom's rebellion, fresh trouble stirred from an unexpected quarter. A Benjaminite troublemaker named Sheba, son of Bichri, saw opportunity in the moment's confusion. Seizing a ram's horn, he blew a piercing blast and cried out words that split the barely healed nation. "We have no share in David, no part in Jesse's son. Every man to his tent, O Israel." His call awakened dormant grievances among northern tribes who felt neglected under Judah's rule. Men who had followed David now peeled away, returning to their homes while pledging loyalty to Sheba. This rebellion spread quickly through Benjamin's territory, where memories of Saul's kingship still lingered in every village square. For Benjamin, Sheba's uprising represented more than politics. It touched the core of tribal identity. Having lost their royal status when Saul fell, some viewed this rebellion as divine opportunity to reclaim lost prominence. Others, remembering David's mercy toward Mephibosheth and other Saulides, hesitated to join this desperate gamble. David, recognizing the danger, acted decisively. He ordered Amasa, his newly appointed commander, to gather Judah's forces within 3 days. When Amasa delayed, David turned to Abishai instead. Now Sheba, son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom did. Take your master's men and pursue him, or he will find fortified cities and escape from us. As royal forces mobilized, word reached the Benjaminite rebellion that Israel's most experienced warriors now hunted them. Sheba fled northward, gathering supporters as he moved through friendly territories. Behind him, David's army pursued like wolves on a blood trail, determined to crush this threat before it grew beyond control. Near the stone of Gibeon, a place haunted by memories of previous conflict between David and Saul's house, Joab encountered his cousin and rival Amasa. With a cold calculation that characterized his military genius, Joab grasped Amasa's beard as if to kiss him, then thrust his dagger into the man's belly. Stepping over the dying commander, Joab resumed the chase, calling out, "Whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab." Across Benjamin's hills and valleys, village leaders faced impossible choices. Supporting Sheba meant defying the king and risking destruction. Opposing him meant betraying a fellow tribesman and admitting that dreams of Benjamin's restoration had faded beyond recovery. Most chose caution, closing their gates to both rebels and royal forces, while waiting to see which way the winds of fortune blew. Sheba's northward flight ended at Abel Beth Maacah, a fortified city far from Benjamin's borders. As Joab's forces built siege ramps against the walls, a wise woman called down from the ramparts, "Listen, listen, tell Joab to come here so I can speak with him." When Joab approached, she negotiated salvation for her city. They used to say in the old days, "Get your answer at Abel. We are the peaceful and faithful ones of Israel. You are trying to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the Lord's inheritance?" "Far be it from me," Joab replied. "I do not want to swallow up or destroy. That is not the case. A man named Sheba, son of Bichri, from the hill country of Ephraim, has lifted his hand against King David. Hand over this one man, and I'll withdraw from the city." Before nightfall, Sheba's head flew over the wall, ending his rebellion as quickly as it had begun. Joab sounded the trumpet of withdrawal, and his troops returned to Jerusalem. The rebellion collapsed not through pitched battle, but negotiation and the pragmatic sacrifice of one troublemaker for the survival of many. For Benjamin, Sheba's failed uprising marked a turning point in their relationship with the Davidic dynasty. Those who had briefly hoped for restored glory now faced reality. Their future lay not in resistance, but in finding their place within the United Kingdom. Younger leaders emerged who looked forward rather than backward, seeking ways to preserve Benjamin's unique identity while accepting their role in Israel's larger story. In time, this adjustment brought unexpected blessings. As Jerusalem grew in prominence under Solomon, Benjamin's territory gained value through proximity to the capital. Their craftsmen found work in royal building projects, their farmers supplied the growing city, and their merchants profited from trade routes passing through their lands. What they lost in political power, they gained in economic opportunity. Sheba's head, displayed briefly at Jerusalem's gate, served as a warning against future rebellions. Yet it also closed a chapter in Benjamin's history, the last gasp of a dream that had begun with Saul's anointing and ended with his descendants' death. Now Benjamin would write a new story, not as rulers, but as essential partners in building Solomon's golden age. The rise of Solomon, a new era. As King David lay beneath heavy blankets, his aged body unable to find warmth despite the efforts of his attendants, the question of succession loomed over Israel. Though he had named Solomon as heir, another son, Adonijah, gathered supporters, including the powerful Joab. While sacrifices and celebrations marked Adonijah's premature coronation at En-Rogel, the prophet Nathan acted quickly to inform David through Bathsheba. Rousing himself one final time, David commanded, "Take Solomon on my own mule to Gihon. There have Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king over Israel. Blow the trumpet and shout, 'Long live King Solomon.'" The sound of celebration at Solomon's anointing reached Adonijah's ears during his own feast, ending his rebellion before it fully formed. For the tribe of Benjamin, this transition brought mixed emotions. Solomon's ascension meant continued rule from David's line rather than any return to their own royal heritage under Saul. Yet Solomon's mother Bathsheba had grown up in Gibeah of Benjamin as the wife of Uriah the Hittite before becoming David's queen. This connection, though rarely mentioned openly, gave Benjaminites a subtle claim to the new king's lineage. After David's death, Solomon secured his throne through decisive action. He executed Joab for past murders and exiled Abiathar the priest, both Adonijah supporters. When Shimei, the Benjaminite who had cursed David, violated the terms of his house arrest, Solomon ordered his execution as well. Yet these targeted removals of threats showed restraint compared to the wholesale slaughter common when new kings took power in surrounding nations. With peace established, Solomon turned to governing. Unlike his warrior father, this king valued wisdom above military might. When God appeared to him in a dream offering any gift, Solomon requested a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. This choice pleased God, who granted him unparalleled wisdom along with riches and honor. Solomon's famous judgment between two women claiming the same baby demonstrated this divine gift. When he ordered the infant cut in two, giving half to each claimant, the true mother's anguished cry revealed her identity. News of this wisdom spread throughout Benjamin and beyond, bringing increasing numbers of people seeking the king's guidance in disputes. Under Solomon's rule, Benjamin found new pathways to prosperity. Their strategic location between Jerusalem and the northern tribes positioned them perfectly for trade. Solomon's massive building projects required skilled craftsmen and laborers, many drawn from Benjamin's towns. Their proximity to the capital meant royal officials often came from their ranks, integrating them into the administration despite their past connection to Saul's house. Solomon's marriage alliances with surrounding nations opened new markets for Benjaminite merchants. The king's unprecedented peace allowed safe travel along roads that had previously been plagued by bandits. Tax revenues funded improvements benefiting all tribes, including irrigation systems and fortifications that enhanced Benjamin's agricultural output and security. When Solomon organized the nation into 12 administrative districts for taxation and labor, he showed political wisdom by not following strict tribal boundaries. Benjamin found itself divided. Some clans joined with northern territories, while others merged with areas around Jerusalem. Though initially concerning to tribal elders, this arrangement actually reduced tribal tensions by creating cross-cutting loyalties. The king's legendary wealth flowed partly from his control of trade routes passing through Benjamin's territory. Caravans from Egypt, Arabia, and Mesopotamia traveled roads winding through Benjaminite lands, bringing exotic goods and ideas along with tax revenue. Villages once focused solely on farming transformed into prosperous market towns where multiple languages could be heard in busy squares. Not all welcomed these changes. Old-fashioned Benjaminites grumbled that wealth brought moral decay, foreign influences threatened ancient traditions, and Solomon's heavy taxes and labor demands placed burdens on ordinary families. In quiet corners of village gatherings, some whispered that their tribe had been better off under Saul's simpler rule. Yet most recognized that Solomon's golden age offered opportunities previously unimaginable. Young Benjaminites could now serve in the royal court, join the growing merchant class, or learn specialized crafts needed for the temple project. Their tribe might no longer reign, but they could thrive within a united Israel whose glory now stretched beyond anything their ancestors had known. As Solomon established his reign, Benjamin learned to navigate this new reality, honoring their past while embracing a future shaped by David's son rather than Saul's. Their adaptability would serve them well in coming years, for beneath the glittering surface of Solomon's peace, tensions simmered that would eventually tear the kingdom apart. Solomon's Temple, a tribe's legacy. Morning light bathed Jerusalem's eastern ridge as thousands gathered for an unprecedented moment. Solomon stood before the massive temple structure, its limestone walls and cedar beams gleaming in the sunrise. After 7 years of construction, the house of God stood complete, a wonder surpassing anything Israel had known before. For the tribe of Benjamin, this occasion carried special significance. The temple rose on land once belonging partly to their territory, Mount Moriah, where David had built an altar to end the plague. Now this site would permanently house the Ark of the Covenant and serve as the nation's spiritual center. Though Solomon ruled from David's line, the temple itself stood as Benjamin's foothold in Israel's future. Construction had transformed Jerusalem and surrounding Benjaminite lands. Forests of cedar floated down from Lebanon, stone cut from northern quarries traveled dusty roads, and bronze cast in Jordan Valley clay molds made its way to the Holy City. Skilled craftsmen from Tyre worked alongside Israelite laborers, including many Benjaminites whose proximity to the building site made them natural participants. The details of this magnificent structure overwhelmed the senses. Two massive bronze pillars named Jachin and Boaz flanked the entrance. Inside, cedar panels carved with flowers and palm trees covered stone walls, while pure gold overlay the inner sanctuary. A massive bronze basin called the Sea rested on 12 bronze bulls, with 10 smaller basins on wheels for washing sacrifices. As the dedication ceremony began, priests carried the Ark of the Covenant from its temporary dwelling in the city of David up to the Temple Mount. White-robed Levites, many from Benjamin's families, sang with cymbals, harps, and lyres. When the Ark reached the Holy of Holies, something extraordinary happened. The cloud of God's glory filled the temple so completely that priests could not continue their service. Solomon spread his hands toward heaven and prayed words that echoed across the silent crowd. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? He asked not that God would be limited to this place, but that divine attention would focus here whenever people prayed toward it, whether in blessing or distress. For 7 days, the dedication continued with feasting and sacrifices beyond counting. People from every tribe, Benjamin prominently among them, crowded Jerusalem's streets, sharing meals and stories while gazing in wonder at the temple that would define their national identity for generations. After the celebrations ended and visitors returned home, Benjaminite villages buzzed with accounts from those who had witnessed the dedication. Elders gathered young people to explain how this magnificent structure connected to their tribal history, from Jacob's blessing of Benjamin to Saul's kingship to David's purchase of the threshing floor that became the Temple Mount. The temple transformed daily life throughout Benjamin's territory. 3 times yearly, families journeyed to Jerusalem for major festivals, turning sleepy Benjaminite roads into busy pilgrim routes. Local economies shifted to support these travelers with food, lodging, and sacrificial animals. Villages once focused solely on farming became way stations for the faithful. For Benjaminite Levites, the temple offered unprecedented opportunities for service. Solomon organized 24 divisions of priests and musicians to maintain continuous worship. Many from Benjamin's clans found their life's purpose singing in temple choirs, guarding sacred spaces, or assisting with sacrifices. Their connection to this holy place helped heal old wounds left by the tribe's fall from political power. Not everyone welcomed these changes. Some traditional Benjaminites worried that centralizing worship in Jerusalem diminished the importance of local sacred sites where they had encountered God for generations. Others questioned the enormous wealth invested in gold and precious materials when ordinary families struggled with Solomon's heavy taxes. Yet most recognized something profound in this new arrangement. The temple offered all Israel, regardless of tribal origin, equal access to God's presence. A shepherd from Benjamin could stand alongside a merchant from Judah or a farmer from Ephraim, all facing the same bronze altar, all watching the same sacred smoke rise toward heaven. Perhaps most significant for Benjamin was how the temple altered their relationship with the monarchy. Though David's line held the throne, the temple stood partly on Benjaminite soil, a permanent reminder of their essential place in Israel's story. Political power might shift and fade, But this sacred space anchored their identity to something transcending tribal politics. As years passed, the glory of Solomon's temple became Benjamin's shared inheritance, not as a conquered people who had lost their way, but as guardians of holy ground where heaven touched earth. Their warriors who once fought for Saul's kingdom now protected pilgrim roads. Their craftsmen who might have adorned a Benjaminite palace now maintained sacred vessels. Their singers who could have celebrated tribal victories now offered psalms of praise transcending all divisions. In this transformation lay Benjamin's greatest strength, the ability to find new purpose when old dreams faded. The tribe that nearly vanished after Gibeah and lost its royal house with Saul now anchored its identity in something more enduring than political power. As Solomon's golden reign reached its zenith, the temple stood as Benjamin's living legacy, their unique contribution to Israel's unfolding story. The divided kingdom. Solomon's death brought the moment many had quietly feared. His son Rehoboam traveled to Shechem for coronation, facing a people weary from heavy taxation and forced labor. When northern representatives led by Jeroboam requested lighter burdens, the new king fatefully rejected his elders' counsel. "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." The northern tribe's response echoed Sheba's earlier rebellion. "What share do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David." The United Kingdom Solomon had ruled shattered like a clay pot, breaking along fault lines that had existed since tribal days. For Benjamin, this rupture posed an agonizing choice. Geographically, they sat directly between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Their lands touched Jerusalem, now capital of the diminished southern realm, yet their historic connections often pulled northward. Which path should they follow? The question divided families and villages. Some Benjaminites recalled their kinship with Joseph's tribes through their shared mother Rachel, arguing they belonged with the north. Others pointed to decades of integration with Jerusalem's economic and religious life, making separation impractical. The tribe stood literally and figuratively caught between two worlds. Rehoboam, recognizing Benjamin's strategic importance, acted decisively to secure their loyalty. He built or strengthened fortifications throughout Benjaminite territory. Cities like Geba, Mizpah, and Gibeon became southern strongholds against northern aggression. These military investments brought jobs and protection that helped sway many toward Judah's side. Even more compelling was Jerusalem's pull. The temple, partly on Benjaminite soil, had become central to their spiritual identity. Jeroboam, fearing pilgrimages would undermine northern loyalty, established competing worship centers at Dan and Bethel with golden calves as divine symbols. For many Benjaminites, this troubling echo of Israel's wilderness sins settled the question. They would remain with Judah and the temple. Yet the division cut through Benjamin's heart, not around it. Northern clans found themselves under Jeroboam's rule, while southern portions aligned with Rehoboam. Families separated by just a few miles now lived in different kingdoms with hardening borders. Trade routes that once connected Benjaminite villages became international passages, requiring taxes and inspections. This painful reality turned Benjamin's territory into a perpetual battleground. When Egypt's pharaoh Shishak invaded during Rehoboam's 5th year, his armies swept through Benjamin's towns before attacking Jerusalem. Later, conflicts between North and South often focused on border regions where Benjaminite communities suffered repeated destruction and rebuilding. Over time, the tribe's identity gradually merged with Judah's, though never completely. Benjaminites maintained awareness of their distinct heritage while participating fully in the southern kingdom's life. Their warriors defended Jerusalem's walls, their farmers supplied the capital's markets, and their craftsmen maintained the temple's splendor. Several later kings of Judah, including Jehoshaphat, took wives from Benjamin's prominent families, further binding the tribes together. Yet traces of division remained. When prophets arose, condemning Judah's sins, some Benjaminites remembered their separate origins and questioned whether joining the southern kingdom had been wise. During periods when northern Israel briefly prospered under kings like Jeroboam II, Border communities sometimes wondered which side offered better protection and opportunity. This position in the middle, geographically, politically, and emotionally, shaped Benjamin's character for generations. They became experts at balancing competing loyalties, navigating difficult boundaries, and finding opportunity in challenging circumstances. Having survived near extinction after Gibeah and political decline after Saul, they now adapted to division by embracing their role as bridges between Israel's fragmented pieces. When foreign threats loomed larger than internal rivalries, Benjamin's border position made them early warning sentinels for Jerusalem. Their watchmen on northern hills could spot approaching armies days before they reached the capital. This protective role gave them pride of place in Judah's defensive strategy and renewed sense of purpose, despite their diminished political status. As years passed and prophets warned of coming judgment for both kingdoms' idolatry, Benjamin's divided experience offered perspective. They had seen how quickly human institutions could break apart. Their history taught hard lessons about clinging too tightly to tribal identity at the expense of deeper values. These insights would prove vital in the difficult centuries ahead, when both kingdoms would fall and new forms of survival would be required. The Northern Threat, Benjamin under siege. The soft glow of dawn crept over Benjamin's hills, revealing watchmen scanning the horizon with tired eyes. For them, sunrise meant another day of waiting for northern armies to appear. Their tribe sat wedged between two feuding brothers, Israel to the north and Judah to the south, a precarious position that brought little peace. Jeroboam, the shrewd new king of the northern realm, knew Benjamin's worth. Their land bridged vital trade routes and held strategic passes that armies needed. More than this, Benjamin's villages stood as the first line of defense for Jerusalem. If he could sway them to his side, Judah would lose its buffer against attack. So began his campaign of whispers and promises. His messengers slipped into Benjaminite towns under cover of night, speaking of shared history and offering wealth for allegiance. Remember, they would say, most of your land sits north of Jerusalem. Your fate ties more naturally to ours than to Judah's. Some families wavered, drawn by these words. The tribe had never fully embraced David's line, not after what happened to Saul's house. Old wounds festered beneath the surface, making Jeroboam's offers tempting to those who still nursed grudges. But King Rehoboam of Judah played his own hand well. The temple stands within your borders, his priests reminded the Benjaminites. Would you turn your backs on God's dwelling place, on the legacy your hands helped build? These words struck deep, especially among the devout who saw the temple as their tribe's greatest achievement. The struggle for Benjamin's heart turned their fields into battlegrounds. Northern armies pushed south repeatedly, burning villages and crops. Ramah, just 5 miles from Jerusalem, changed hands 7 times in 1 year alone. Families fled their homes as soldiers trampled their carefully tended vines and olive groves. Mizpah, once a place of solemn gatherings, became a fortress. Watchmen stood day and night on its ancient walls, scanning for dust clouds that meant approaching troops. Children grew up knowing which caves offered the best shelter when warning horns sounded across the hills. Through these dark years, most Benjaminites stood with Judah, though not without cost. Their loyalty meant their borders bled first when war came. Their sons died defending hills that larger tribes took for granted. Their daughters carried water to exhausted defenders and bound wounds after each clash. The northern threat shaped Benjamin into something new, no longer just farmers and craftsmen, but a tribe of border guards and sentinels. Children learned swordplay alongside sheep tending. Women studied healing herbs while keeping knives hidden in their sleeves. Every village became a potential fortress, every hill a lookout point, and through it all, the tales of their ancestors sustained them. We survived near extinction once, elders would remind the young. We endured the darkness at Rimmond's Rock. We can withstand this storm too. These stories, passed down through firelight and whispers, kept hope alive through the longest sieges. Year after year, the pressure continued. Benjamin bent but never broke, holding its ground against the larger northern forces. Their stubborn defense of Jerusalem's northern approach became legendary among all the tribes. What they lacked in numbers, they made up for in fierce determination and intimate knowledge of every hill and valley of their homeland. This was Benjamin's finest hour since the days of Saul, not as conquerors, but as guardians. The smallest tribe had become Judah's shield, its villages forming a living wall against which the northern kingdom broke time and again like waves against stone. Essay and the Ethiopian invasion. King Asa of Judah stood on Jerusalem's walls, eyes fixed on the southern horizon where dust clouds swirled. Reports had reached him days before. An Ethiopian army vast beyond counting approached, led by Zerah, who boasted he would crush Judah beneath his feet. Among the anxious faces surrounding the king stood several Benjaminite elders, their expressions grim yet resolute. "Your tribe has bled enough defending our northern borders," Asa told them. "Perhaps you should spare your men this fight." The oldest among them stepped forward, his beard white as winter frost. "Benjamin stands with Judah," he said simply. "Our fates joined long ago." That night, as campfires from the Ethiopian host lit the southern plains like fallen stars, messengers raced through Benjamin's towns. Men kissed wives and children goodbye, gathered spears and shields, and marched toward the valley of Zephathah, where Asa hoped to make his stand. By dawn, Benjaminite archers formed the right flank of Judah's smaller force. Despite facing an army twice their size, with chariots and horsemen beyond counting, they stood firm. King Asa led them in prayer before the battle, his voice carrying across the quiet ranks. "Lord, it makes no difference to you to help those with many or those with no power. Help us, Lord our God, for we rely on you." When the Ethiopians charged, they met unexpected resistance. The men of Benjamin, veterans of countless border skirmishes, loosed arrows with deadly accuracy, targeting chariot drivers to create chaos in the enemy ranks. Their famous left-handed slingers struck down officers from impossible distances. The battle raged from morning until the sun hung low in the west. Against all odds, the tide turned. Ethiopian formations broke apart, their retreat becoming a rout. Judah's army pursued them all the way to Gerar, claiming spoils beyond measure. In victory's wake, Benjamin found new respect among the southern tribes. For generations, they had been viewed with suspicion, their loyalty questioned because of old conflicts. Now they had proven themselves on the battlefield, standing shoulder to shoulder with Judah against overwhelming odds. King Asa used the breathing space this victory provided to strengthen Benjamin's defenses. He fortified Geba and Mizpah using materials taken from Ramah, transforming them into formidable strongholds. These cities formed a defensive line protecting Jerusalem's northern approach. For the first time in decades, Benjaminite farmers could tend fields without constantly watching the horizon. A spiritual revival followed these military successes. Asa removed foreign altars and restored proper worship throughout the land. Benjaminites who had dabbled in northern religious practices returned to the temple. Great processions wound their way up to Jerusalem for festivals, with Benjamin's musicians leading the songs. This period brought prosperity as well. Trade routes reopened, bringing goods from Egypt and Arabia through Benjamin's towns. Craftsmen flourished, particularly those skilled in metalwork, a Benjaminite specialty since ancient times. Their bronze vessels and iron tools became prized throughout the region. For nearly 2 decades, peace settled over Benjamin's hills. Children grew up hearing stories of battle rather than experiencing its horrors firsthand. Elderly veterans who had defended their borders since the kingdom split could finally rest their weary bones, watching grandchildren play in village squares without fear. Yet wise elders reminded the young not to grow complacent. "Peace is a gentle stream that can dry up without warning," they cautioned. "Keep your swords sharp and your hearts ready." They spoke truth, for beyond the horizon new threats gathered. Assyria rose in the distant north, its armies conquering nation after nation. Closer to home, Israel and Syria formed an alliance against Judah that would soon test Benjamin's defenses once more. The respite Asa brought was precious but temporary, a quiet moment between storms. Still, this golden age under Asa left its mark on Benjamin's character. They had proven themselves not just as fierce warriors, but as faithful adherents to the covenant. Their identity grew stronger through these trials, more distinct from the northern tribes who had chosen a different path. In village gatherings, songs celebrated not just ancient heroes, but recent victories. Children played at being Ethiopian invaders and Benjaminite defenders. For a tribe long overshadowed by larger neighbors, These years of standing tall alongside Judah healed old wounds and fostered new pride. The prophetic warnings. Benjamin's future. Rain fell softly on Jerusalem's temple as Jeremiah the prophet stood in its outer court. Gathered before him, a crowd of Benjaminites listened with growing unease. Their homes lay just north of the holy city, directly in the path of any invasion from Babylon. When prophets spoke of coming judgment, Benjamin's people felt the shadow of those words more keenly than most. "Go now to my place that was in Shiloh," Jeremiah's voice rang out, "and see what I did to it because of the wickedness of my people Israel. Will I not do to this house which bears my name what I did to Shiloh?" These words cut deep. Many recalled how Shiloh, once home to the sacred ark, had been destroyed generations earlier. If God would allow his temple to suffer the same fate, what hope remained for their vulnerable towns? Jeremiah wasn't the only prophet walking Benjamin's dusty roads. Isaiah had spoken earlier of a time when the Assyrian will fall by a sword not of man. His words offered hope mixed with warning. Deliverance would come, but only after great suffering. Micah had prophesied that Jerusalem would become a heap of rubble. Since Benjamin's fate intertwined with the holy cities, such visions spelled disaster for their tribe as well. In village squares and family gatherings, these prophecies sparked heated debates. Some dismissed the warnings as the ramblings of madmen. God would never abandon his temple, they insisted. Jerusalem stands protected by divine promise. Others took the words to heart, especially those who had witnessed the spiritual decay spreading throughout the land. Foreign gods now had altars in Benjamin's high places. Sacred prostitution, child sacrifice, and corruption had taken root even among those who should have known better. A Benjaminite elder named Shemaiah gained attention during this time. Having studied ancient scrolls and prophecies, he traveled between villages urging repentance. "Remember our history," he would say. "Once before, our tribe faced extinction because we protected wrongdoers in Gibeah. Do we choose that path again?" His words stirred many hearts, particularly among families who maintained the old traditions. Small groups began meeting at twilight to study the Torah and renew their commitment to the covenant. They called themselves the Remnant, believing they would carry Benjamin's legacy through the coming darkness. Meanwhile, beyond their borders, the world shifted dangerously. Assyria's power waned as Babylon rose to prominence under Nebuchadnezzar. Egypt and Babylon clashed for regional dominance, with Judah caught between these giants like grain between millstones. Jeremiah continued his warnings, now with specific instructions for Benjamin. "Flee from Jerusalem, blow the trumpet in Tekoa, raise the signal over Beth Hakkerem, for disaster looms from the north and terrible destruction." Tekoa and Beth Hakkerem, both Benjaminite settlements, were positioned to first spot approaching armies. The prophet's words placed on them the solemn responsibility of warning Jerusalem when Babylon finally marched south. Some families heeded these warnings, selling their lands and moving to remote hills or even leaving for Egypt. Others doubled down on defensive preparations, reinforcing walls and storing provisions. Most simply continued daily life while anxiety grew beneath the surface, planting fields they might never harvest, raising children whose future looked increasingly uncertain. In the capital, King Jehoiakim rejected the prophet's counsel, choosing instead to rebel against Babylon and align with Egypt. Political factions emerged within Benjamin, some supporting the king's defiance, while others urged submission to Babylon, as Jeremiah advised. Villages that had stood united against northern threats now found themselves divided from within. Through these tense years, Benjaminite scribes preserved the prophet's words on scrolls, sensing their historical importance. They recorded not just warnings, but also promises that shimmered like distant stars in a dark sky. Words about restoration and return, about a time when God would bring back the captives of Jacob's tents. Hidden within Jeremiah's stark warnings lay seeds of hope. "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." These words passed from mouth to ear throughout Benjamin's settlements, sustaining spirits as storm clouds gathered. As the years passed and prophecies began manifesting in frightening ways, Benjamin's character as a tribe transformed once more. The warriors who had defended borders became seekers of deeper wisdom, trying to discern divine patterns in unfolding events. Their famous pragmatism now mixed with a mystical streak. They became collectors of prophecies, watchers of signs, preparers for exile. And all the while, the shadow from the north grew longer, stretching toward their vulnerable hills as Babylon's armies drew ever closer to fulfilling the prophet's dire words. The rise of Babylon. Doomsday approaches. The first rumors reached Benjamin's like distant thunder, stories of a new king in Babylon whose ambitions stretched across the known world. Nebuchadnezzar, son of Nabopolassar, had crushed Egyptian forces at Carchemish, shifting the balance of power throughout the region. For common folks tending fields and orchards in Benjamin's rolling hills, such distant battles meant little at first. Soon enough, that would change. One cool autumn morning, unusual dust clouds appeared on the northern horizon. By nightfall, refugees from devastated towns brought terrifying news. Babylonian scouts had crossed into Judah's territory. What the prophets had warned about for years was now unfolding before their eyes. King Jehoiakim of Judah, having rebelled against Babylonian authority, learned too late the cost of his defiance. Nebuchadnezzar's response was swift and calculated. Rather than immediately besieging Jerusalem, his forces systematically targeted the outlying regions first, and Benjamin bore the brunt of this strategy. Anathoth, birthplace of Jeremiah, fell within days. Its stone houses, standing for centuries, crumbled under Babylonian siege engines. Families who escaped brought harrowing tales to neighboring villages, of soldiers rounding up skilled craftsmen and young nobles, binding them in chains for the long march to Babylon. Among those taken in this first wave was a young priest named Ezekiel, barely 20 years old. His keen mind and religious training made him valuable to the conquerors, who sought to integrate select captives into Babylonian society. Families watched helplessly as their brightest youth disappeared over the northern hills, unlikely to ever return. Bethel, once a center of worship since Patriarch Jacob's time, became a Babylonian outpost. Soldiers camped among its sacred stones, their foreign languages and gods a bitter irony in this place where heaven and earth had reportedly met. From this strategic position, they launched raids deeper into Benjamin's territory, gathering supplies and breaking the people's will to resist. In Jerusalem, King Jehoiakim finally submitted to Babylon's might. Nebuchadnezzar demanded a heavy tribute, including temple treasures and royal hostages. Among these first captives were members of Benjamin's leading families, young men of noble birth selected for their intelligence and bearing. Daniel and his friends, whose faithfulness would later become legendary, began their journey into exile during these dark days. For those who remained in Benjamin's towns, life changed dramatically. Heavy taxation stripped their storehouses bare. Babylonian officials conducted regular censuses, noting every able-bodied worker and potential soldier. Fields lay fallow as farmers were conscripted for building projects or military support. The weight of foreign occupation pressed down like an invisible yoke. Yet human resilience shows most clearly in such times. Hidden from Babylonian eyes, village elders preserved sacred texts, burying scrolls in clay jars or concealing them in cave systems that honeycomb Benjamin's limestone hills. Children learned Torah passages by moonlight, their whispers barely audible beyond family circles. Women passed down traditional songs and customs through daily routines, ensuring cultural threads remained unbroken. When King Jehoiakim foolishly rebelled again, Nebuchadnezzar's patience ended. The second wave of Babylonian forces struck with calculated fury. This time their target was clear, Jerusalem itself. To reach it, they would first need to secure Benjamin's strategic passes and fortified towns. Gibeon fell after a 3-day siege, its famous pool running red with defenders' blood. Ramah surrendered without a fight, its inhabitants choosing survival over certain destruction. Mizpah, with its commanding view of surrounding territories, became a Babylonian military headquarters. The irony lost on none, as this was where Israel had once gathered to plan war against Benjamin generations earlier. By the time Babylonian forces encircled Jerusalem, Benjamin's territory lay in ruins. Smoke rose from burned villages. Ancient olive groves, some dating back centuries, had been cut down for siege equipment and fuel. Terraced fields cultivated by generations lay trampled and abandoned. Inside the capital, young King Jehoiakim quickly realized the futility of resistance. After barely 3 months on the throne, he surrendered to Nebuchadnezzar. The Babylonian king's terms proved harsh. Another massive deportation of nobles, craftsmen, priests, and warriors. Nearly 10,000 of Judah's most valuable citizens began the long journey east, including more Benjaminite families. Zedekiah, installed as a puppet king by Babylon, watched helplessly as his kingdom shrank to little more than Jerusalem and its immediate surroundings. Benjamin's territory now effectively served as a Babylonian military zone, its remaining villages subject to the whims of foreign commanders. For those Benjaminites already in exile, a strange transformation began. Settled in communities along Babylon's canals, they clung fiercely to their identity, their famous adaptability, the trait that had helped them survive as a buffer tribe for generations, now served them well in foreign lands. They learned new languages and skills while maintaining private devotion to their God. Back in their homeland, the remnant who had avoided deportation lived in a strange limbo. With their leaders gone and sacred places desecrated, they moved like shadows through a landscape they barely recognized. Old tribal boundaries meant little under Babylonian rule. Benjaminites and Judahites now shared the same fate, their ancient rivalries fading against greater concerns. As Zedekiah's reign progressed, hope briefly flickered when Egypt showed interest in challenging Babylonian dominance. False prophets circulated through Benjamin's broken villages, promising imminent liberation. Against Jeremiah's explicit warnings, Zedekiah eventually succumbed to these whispers and rebelled. The response from Babylon would bring the final chapter of destruction, one that would scar the land for generations to come. The fall of Jerusalem. Benjamin in ruins. Dawn broke over Jerusalem's walls as exhausted defenders peered toward the eastern hills. For 18 months, Nebuchadnezzar's forces had choked the city like a slowly tightening noose. Now, in the scorching summer heat of 586 BCE, the end seemed near. Among these desperate fighters stood the last of Benjamin's warriors, their homes already ash and rubble beyond the city's northern gates. In Benjamin's once thriving villages, only the elderly, infirm, and very young remained. From hidden caves and remote hilltops, they watched as siege engines moved into final position. The great forests that once covered their tribal lands had been stripped bare, the timber used for Babylonian war machines. Fields that should have ripened with barley and wheat lay trampled and barren. Inside Jerusalem's walls, famine had done what Babylonian weapons could not. People collapsed in streets, too weak to bury their dead. Water, strictly rationed, tasted of desperation. Mothers with hollow eyes cradled silent infants, unable to produce milk. The horrors Jeremiah predicted had come to pass. In the darkest corners, the unthinkable occurred, as hunger drove some to unspeakable measures. On a moonless night in early summer, King Zedekiah made his desperate move. With a small band of fighters, many from Benjamin's tribe, known for their night-fighting skills, he slipped through a small gate near the king's garden, hoping to reach the Jordan Valley. For a brief moment, freedom seemed possible, but Babylonian scouts spotted them in the plains near Jericho. The king who had ignored prophetic warnings now faced their fulfillment. Brought before Nebuchadnezzar at Riblah, Zedekiah watched his sons executed before his eyes became the last thing he would ever see. Blinded and chained, he began the long journey to Babylon, Dasrat, a living symbol of divine judgment. Back in Jerusalem, Nebuzaradan, commander of Nebuchadnezzar's imperial guard, implemented his king's final solution. The temple, standing for over 4 centuries as the spiritual heart of Israel, burned for 3 days. Its sacred vessels, those not already taken in earlier raids, disappeared into Babylon's treasury. Golden cherubim that had witnessed generations of prayers now rode in conquerors' wagons heading east. From their hiding places throughout Benjamin's hills, survivors watched Jerusalem's destruction with silent horror. The smoke column rising from the Temple Mount could be seen for miles, a funeral pyre for their way of life. When the flames finally died, Babylonian soldiers methodically dismantled the city walls, ensuring Jerusalem could never again serve as a fortress of rebellion. The psychological impact ran deeper than any physical destruction. Since Solomon's time, Benjamin had defined itself partly through proximity to the temple. Their territory contained sacred sites where heaven and earth met. Now, with holy places desecrated and sacred rituals impossible to perform, an existential question emerged. Could they remain God's people without the visible symbols of his presence? Across Benjamin's landscape, destruction was not random, but calculated. Anything with military value, walls, towers, stone buildings, was systematically demolished. Fruit trees that required decades to mature were cut down, ensuring the land could not easily support rebellion. Wells were filled with debris, cisterns shattered. This was not mere conquest, but deliberate erasure. Yet even in this bleakest moment, seeds of resilience took root. As Babylonian deportation officers rounded up the last valuable captives, craftspeople, scribes, remaining nobles, they overlooked the rural poor. These forgotten ones, deemed worthless by empire standards, would become the surprising caretakers of the land. Mizpah, once a Benjaminite stronghold, became the administrative center for what remained of Judah under Gedaliah, a governor appointed by Babylon. Some Benjaminites cautiously emerged from hiding, drawn by his reasonable policies and Jeremiah's endorsement of cooperation with Babylon as the path to survival. For a brief moment, hope flickered. Farmers began clearing fields, markets reopened with meager goods, children played again in the shadows of ruined towns. Gedaliah's pragmatic leadership offered a vision of life continuing, albeit under foreign rule. This fragile peace shattered when nationalists assassinated Gedaliah, triggering harsh Babylonian reprisals and a final wave of deportations. Fearing collective punishment, many remaining Benjaminites fled to Egypt against Jeremiah's counsel, taking the elderly prophet with them against his will. The land fell eerily quiet. Villages that had bustled with life for centuries stood abandoned, their stones gradually reclaimed by creeping vines and persistent roots. Wild animals roamed through former streets and marketplaces. Jackals howled from temple ruins, fulfilling prophetic warnings with chilling precision. Yet not all departed. In remote valleys and hidden caves, some Benjaminites remained, becoming virtually invisible to maintain their tenuous existence. These overlooked survivors, too poor to deport, too insignificant to count, preserved ancestral connections to the land through dark years. Meanwhile, in Babylon, deported Benjaminites faced their own struggles. Initially settled along irrigation canals south of the great city, they confronted fundamental questions about faith and identity. Could they worship without a temple? Was God still with them in this foreign land? Did their covenant still stand after such complete defeat? From this crisis of meaning emerged new forms of religious practice. Without temple sacrifices, prayer and scripture study gained prominence. Synagogue gatherings began, centered around Torah reading and remembrance. The defining elements of later Judaism took shape in these exile communities, born from necessity but growing into tradition. Some Benjaminites found unexpected opportunities in Babylon. Their tribe had always included gifted administrators and craftspeople. These skills proved valuable in the empire's bureaucracy and workshops. Gradually, certain families established themselves in Babylonian society while maintaining their distinct identity, a delicate balance that would characterize Jewish diaspora communities for centuries to come. As decades passed, the first generation born in exile grew up with only stories of Jerusalem. For them, Benjamin's Hills existed only in grandparents' tales told on festival evenings. They spoke Aramaic more fluently than Hebrew, knew Babylonian streets better than ancestral paths. Yet something persistent remained, a longing for return, a sense of belonging elsewhere despite never having seen that promised land. Throughout these dark years, prophetic voices offered unexpected comfort. Ezekiel's strange visions spoke of divine presence that moved with the exiles rather than remaining fixed to temple geography. Isaiah's soaring poetry promised restoration and return. These words, copied and shared among exile communities, kept hope alive when physical evidence suggested only defeat. In the ashes of destruction, seeds of something new took root, a faith that could survive without land, temple, or king. Benjamin's people, scattered but unbroken, carried these seeds through their darkest night. Exile and despair, the Benjaminite remnant. 50 years passed like a slow-moving river. Along Babylon's bustling canals, Benjaminite exiles built lives they never wanted but gradually came to accept. Their mud brick houses, clustered in neighborhoods that mimicked hometown layouts, stood as humble monuments to memory and hope. Children born under Mesopotamian stars grew into adults who had never seen Jerusalem's hills. For the first generation of exiles, adjustment proved brutal. Taunted by their captors, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." They hung harps on willow branches and refused to perform sacred music for entertainment. Some older captives simply withered, their spirits broken by temple memories too painful to bear in foreign lands. Others clutched tightly to ritual observances, finding in Sabbath and dietary laws a portable identity that needed no homeland. Young Daniel, taken in the first deportation, rose improbably through Babylon's civil service. His Benjaminite background, coming from a tribe skilled at navigating between larger powers, served him well in court politics. When his famous wisdom saved the Judean community from destruction during Nebuchadnezzar's madness, he became a living symbol that God had not abandoned his people, even in exile. Back in the devastated homeland, life continued for those who remained. In Benjamin's territory, small clusters of families slowly reclaimed ruins, planting between fallen stones and sleeping in caves near ancestral fields. Their poverty became protection. Having nothing worth taking, they faced less harassment from passing armies and officials. Over decades, tiny settlements grew around water sources, their inhabitants officially invisible in imperial records. Within both communities, exiled and remnant, leaders emerged who helped forge new understandings of ancient faith. Without access to temple sacrifice, prayer gained new importance. Fathers became household priests, passing traditions to children through nightly teachings. Women preserved domestic rituals and food customs that maintained cultural boundaries in foreign settings. The exile forced profound theological wrestling. How could they understand their devastating national defeat? Some concluded their suffering came as divine punishment for covenant unfaithfulness. Others suggested more complex interpretations. Perhaps God worked through foreign empires toward purposes they couldn't yet see. These conversations, often heated, occurred in homes and gathering places throughout the Babylonian diaspora. Among the second generation, different challenges emerged. Young people born in Babylon lacked first-hand memories of Jerusalem, but absorbed their parents' longing. Some embraced this inherited homesickness, committing to an eventual return they could scarcely imagine. Others drifted toward Babylonian ways, finding opportunities in trade, crafts, and administration that their parents had initially resisted. Tension between assimilation and preservation defined community boundaries. Simple questions carried enormous weight. Should they learn Akkadian writing? Could they work in shops that sold food to idol temples? Might their children play with Babylonian neighbors? Each family navigated these waters differently, creating diverse expressions of Benjaminite identity. The tribe's famous adaptability proved crucial during these years. Long accustomed to living between competing powers, Benjaminites adjusted more readily than some to their in-between status as resident aliens. Their traditional skills, metalworking, textile production, military strategy, found ready markets in the empire's hungry economy. Some families achieved modest prosperity while maintaining private devotion to their ancestral faith. When Persia rose against Babylon, ripples of change reached Jewish communities throughout Mesopotamia. Daniel, now elderly but still influential, interpreted shifting political winds as divine intervention. His writings from this period, blending apocalyptic imagery with historical analysis, circulated among exile communities, offering cryptic hope that liberation approached. Meanwhile, a young woman named Esther, descended from Benjaminite exiles according to some traditions, found herself improbably elevated to Persia's royal court. Her courage in revealing her heritage to save her people from genocide became legendary, celebrated annually in the festival of Purim. For exiles questioning whether God still watched over them, her story provided powerful evidence. Throughout these decades, scattered Benjaminites maintained connections through messengers and traders who traveled between Babylon and the homeland. Letters wrapped in oilcloth carried family news, rabbinical decisions, and snippets of developing scripture between communities. These fragile paper bridges ensured that the tribe, though physically divided, remained spiritually connected. In the homeland remnant, life centered increasingly around figures like the prophet Haggai, who tended the embers of faith through dark years. Living among Jerusalem's ruins, these teachers developed a vision of restoration that went beyond mere rebuilding. They spoke of a future temple more glorious than Solomon's, of a renewed covenant that would transform hearts more than structures. As Persian power consolidated under Cyrus the Great, Whispers spread through exile communities. The new emperor followed a different policy toward conquered peoples than his Babylonian predecessors. Rather than forced assimilation, he permitted, even encouraged, cultural and religious autonomy. For the first time in generations, return from exile seemed more than distant fantasy. When news came that Cyrus had issued a decree specifically allowing Jews to return and rebuild their temple, debate erupted throughout Benjaminite communities. Some viewed this as the fulfillment of prophetic promises, a divine summons home. Others, having established lives in Mesopotamia, felt torn between ancestral loyalty and present stability. The aging Daniel, having survived multiple imperial transitions, offered wisdom to those wrestling with this choice. Our people have lived through darker nights than this. Whether you go or stay, remember who you are and whose you are. God's purposes unfold across generations, not just our brief lives. As preparations began for the first return journey, Benjaminites faced their most significant choice since the kingdom divided centuries earlier. Would they risk everything to reclaim ancestral lands now grown strange and wild? Or would they maintain exile communities, preserving faith and tradition far from their promised home? The answer, like the tribe itself, would prove complex and adaptable, not either or, but both and. Some would go as pioneers, while others remained to maintain networks of support and connection. Neither choice represented perfect faithfulness or failure, but rather different expressions of the same enduring identity. And so, as the Persian dawn broke over Babylon's ziggurats, caravans formed on the eastern roads. Loaded with carefully packed scrolls, sacred vessels, and fragile hopes, the first returnees set their faces toward Jerusalem, toward home. The return under Cyrus, a second chance. The caravan stretched like a living ribbon across the desert, following ancient trade routes westward from Babylon. Nearly 50,000 exiles had answered the call to return, and with Benjaminites prominently represented among their numbers. Cyrus the Persian, called God's anointed by Isaiah, had opened a door none thought possible, the chance to go home. Leading this remarkable exodus was Sheshbazzar, a Judean prince appointed governor by Persian authorities. Walking beside him, Benjaminite elders carried sacred treasure, temple vessels that had survived Nebuchadnezzar's looting, now returning to their rightful place. These gold and silver objects, wrapped carefully in linen, symbolized continuity between past and future, between what was lost and what might yet be restored. The journey proved arduous. 4 months of travel across hostile terrain tested resolve and faith. Children born in Babylon encountered landscapes utterly foreign to them, harsh deserts, mountain passes, unfamiliar stars. Elderly travelers who had been carried into exile as children now returned with grandchildren in tow, completing a circle begun in tears. Not all chose to return. Many Benjaminites, established in Babylonian professions and communities, elected to remain behind. These staying ones sent resources with those returning, gifts of gold, supplies, scrolls, and letters. Thus began the complex relationship between homeland and diaspora that would characterize Jewish life for centuries to follow. When the travelers finally crested the hill overlooking Jerusalem, many fell to their knees. What greeted them was not the glorious city described in grandparents' bedtime stories, but a desolate ruin. Walls toppled, houses collapsed, the Temple Mount a scarred shadow of its former grandeur. The gap between memory and reality struck like a physical blow. Benjaminite families headed north to ancestral territories, finding overgrown ruins where villages once thrived. Wild vines strangled ancient olive trees. Cisterns had cracked and filled with debris. Wolves denned in collapsed houses. The work ahead would require more than nostalgia. It demanded bone-breaking labor and stubborn hope. The returnees' first priority was building basic shelter before winter arrived. Simple stone houses rose among ancient ruins, often incorporating materials from destroyed structures. Next came agricultural revival, clearing fields, repairing terraces, pruning long-neglected fruit trees. The rhythm of seasons, unchanged despite political upheavals, provided structure to their renewed life. By the following spring, enough stability existed to address the central task, rebuilding the temple. In a solemn ceremony on the ruins of Solomon's sanctuary, priests in ritual garments laid the foundation stone. Trumpets sounded, choirs sang ancient hymns, and the crowd responded with mingled sounds. Younger voices raised in celebration, older ones in tears, remembering what once stood there. This emotional foundation laying marked only the beginning of a troubled process. Local populations who had moved into vacant lands during the exile now viewed returnees with suspicion and hostility. These people of the land, some distantly related to northern Israelite tribes, practiced a religion that mixed Yahweh worship with other traditions. They initially offered to help with temple construction, but their assistance was firmly rejected by purist returnees. The resulting tension escalated into active opposition. Led by Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite, local groups sent complaints to Persian authorities, claiming the rebuilding represented preparation for rebellion. Construction halted, leaving only the foundation complete. For nearly 2 decades, the temple site stood as a painful reminder of dreams deferred. Benjaminite families, settled once more in ancestral lands, focused on rebuilding their own communities during this delay. Their practical nature served them well. Rather than fixating solely on temple restoration, they strengthened local governance, reestablished traditional crafts, and secured their borders against hostile neighbors. The prophets Haggai and Zechariah emerged during this discouraging period, their messages cutting through resignation and fear. Is it time for you to dwell in paneled houses while God's house lies in ruins? Haggai asked pointedly. His words stirred renewed determination, especially among younger Benjaminites who had grown comfortable with the status quo. When Darius first confirmed Cyrus's original decree, temple construction resumed under Zerubbabel's leadership. Benjaminite craftsmen featured prominently in this effort, their metalworking skills particularly valued for creating decorative elements and ritual implements. Though smaller and less ornate than Solomon's original, this second temple represented profound theological significance, visible proof that covenant relationship continued despite exile and return. Upon its completion in 516 BCE, nearly 70 years after the first temple's destruction, celebrations spread throughout the province. For Benjaminites, whose territory surrounded Jerusalem's northern approach, the temple's restoration meant more than religious revival. It signaled economic renewal as pilgrims once again traveled through their towns, buying provisions and lodging on festival journeys. Yet challenges remained. The Persian-appointed governors maintained tight control. Tax burdens felt heavy on communities still rebuilding basic infrastructure. Most painfully, the Holy of Holies stood empty. The Ark of the Covenant, lost during Babylon's conquest, left a void at Israel's spiritual center that no rebuilding could fill. In this complex environment, a scribe named Ezra arrived from Babylon with imperial authorization to implement Torah law as the community's governing code. His reforms touched Benjamin deeply, as intermarriage had become common during Reconstruction years. Families were torn apart as Ezra demanded separation from foreign wives and children, a trauma that left lasting scars on community cohesion. When Nehemiah followed years later with authority to rebuild Jerusalem's walls, Benjaminites joined enthusiastically in the effort. Their towns formed the first line of defense north of the capital, making secure walls a matter of practical security rather than just symbolic importance. Working with tools in one hand and weapons in the other, they completed the seemingly impossible task in just 52 days. This collaborative project healed some divisions between returnees and those who had remained during exile. Shoulder to shoulder, they passed stones and mixed mortar, finding common purpose after years of suspicion. The wall's completion marked a turning point, from surviving to thriving, from looking backward to building forward. Through these years of return and reconstruction, Benjamin's identity evolved once more. Their historical position as a bridge tribe, caught between larger powers, transformed into a spiritual bridging role between tradition and innovation. Having experienced both homeland and exile, they helped forge a Judaism that could survive anywhere while maintaining sacred connection to one place. This second chance, hard-won through generations of exile, had not restored what was lost. Yet in its place grew something perhaps more durable, a faith defined by practice rather than location, by community rather than kingdom, by lifelong learning rather than inherited position. In this new reality, Benjamin found familiar ground, adapting, connecting, surviving against the odds. Rebuilding Jerusalem, a new identity. Morning sunlight caught the edge of Nehemiah's newly completed walls, casting long shadows across Jerusalem's awakening streets. Inside those walls, a remarkable transformation unfolded, not just of stone and timber, but of an entire people finding their way forward after exile's long night. For Benjamin's families, this rebirth carried special significance. Their ancestral lands extended northward from Jerusalem, making the city their southern anchor rather than central dwelling place. Yet they committed themselves fully to its restoration, understanding that their tribe's fate had always been linked to the holy cities. Under Nehemiah's governance, urban planning proceeded with methodical care. Streets followed ancient patterns, though straightened where possible. Water systems, crucial in this semi-arid region, received particular attention. Cisterns cleaned, channels repaired, and the Gihon Springs flow secured within protected walls. Benjaminite engineers, drawing on skills developed in Babylon's advanced hydraulic environment, contributed valuable expertise to these projects. Housing construction revealed changing social patterns. Extended family compounds, once the norm in pre-exile Jerusalem, gave way to smaller dwellings suitable for nuclear families. This shift reflected broader changes in community structure. Tribal identity, while still important, increasingly shared influence with occupational and religious affiliations. With basic infrastructure established, attention turned toward reweaving the social fabric. Nehemiah instituted a resettlement program, asking families from surrounding regions to relocate into Jerusalem proper. The biblical record notes that men of Benjamin figured prominently among those who volunteered for this urban migration, leaving comfortable rural settings to help repopulate the city. These Benjaminite urbanites brought distinctive skills with them: craftsmanship in metals, knowledge of textile production, experience in trade networks extending to Persia. Markets gradually reopened under their influence, connecting Jerusalem once more to commercial routes that had bypassed the ruined city for decades. Temple worship resumed its central place in community life, though with notable differences from pre-exile practices. Without the Ark of the Covenant, rituals focused more intensely on Torah reading and interpretation. The Benjaminite tribe, historically connected to several sacred sites outside Jerusalem, helped bridge traditional practices with emerging synagogue worship developed during exile years. Ezra's public reading of the law marked a pivotal moment in this religious recalibration. Standing on a wooden platform before the Watergate, he unrolled ancient scrolls containing Moses' teachings. As he read in Hebrew, Levites circulated through the crowd, translating into Aramaic, the language now more familiar to most returnees. Many wept upon hearing ancestral obligations clearly articulated, suddenly aware of how far they had drifted from covenant expectations. Rather than ending in despair, this moment of national reckoning concluded with celebration. "Do not grieve," Nehemiah told the gathered people, "for the joy of the Lord is your strength." Feast tables appeared throughout the city, turning sorrow into shared meals and renewed commitment. Benjamin's families, known historically for their hospitality, opened homes to travelers and strangers, embodying the spirit of joyful reconnection. The Feast of Tabernacles, celebrated soon after with unprecedented enthusiasm, symbolized their strange journey. Living temporarily in brush shelters reminded them of wilderness wanderings long ago, and more recently of their own return journey from Babylon. Past and present intertwined through these observances, helping forge coherent identity from fragmented experiences. Gradually, subtle shifts occurred in how Benjamin understood its place within Israel's story. Before exile, they had defined themselves largely through territorial claims and ancestral lineage. Now, while these remained important, religious practice and community participation gained equal weight in tribal identity. A Benjaminite increasingly meant someone who not only descended from Jacob's youngest son, but who lived according to Torah and contributed to community welfare. This evolving self-understanding shaped Benjamin's approach to governance under Persian authority. Their representatives, serving on Nehemiah's council, advocated pragmatic cooperation with imperial officials while maintaining internal religious autonomy. This balanced stance, neither rebellious nor assimilationist, reflected the tribe's historical experience navigating between competing powers. As Jerusalem's population grew, housing shortages prompted development beyond the walls. Benjaminite villages like Anathoth, Nob, and Bethany, all within walking distance of Jerusalem, expanded to accommodate this overflow, creating a ring of satellite communities around the sacred center. These villages preserve distinctive tribal customs while maintaining close connections to temple worship. Agricultural revival proceeded alongside urban development. Terraced hillsides, long abandoned, once again supported vineyards and olive groves. Benjaminite farmers reintroduced crop rotation techniques learned in Mesopotamia, improving yields on marginally productive land. The tribe's territory, always more rugged than southern Judean plains, gradually greened under innovative management. Religious calendar observances structured the year's rhythm, with regular pilgrimages to Jerusalem binding countryside and city in shared practice. 3 times annually, for Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, Benjaminite families traveled southward along ancient paths, joining the larger community in remembrance and celebration. These journeys strengthened both tribal and national identity through shared stories and experiences. Educational practices transformed during this period of rebuilding. Before exile, knowledge transmission occurred primarily within family settings, with occasional formal training for priests and scribes. Now, influenced by Ezra's reforms, boys gathered regularly for Torah instruction, regardless of tribal affiliation or family status. This democratization of learning fundamentally altered Benjamin's social structure, creating new paths to influence beyond inherited position. Women's roles evolved as well, though less visibly in historical records. Exile experiences had often thrust Benjaminite women into economic leadership, while men served in Babylonian labor gangs or military units. Returning to the homeland, many maintained this expanded agency within family businesses and household management. Their influence, while rarely acknowledged in official documents, shaped the tribe's economic recovery and cultural preservation. Intermarriage remained a contentious issue throughout this period. Ezra's stringent reforms had demanded separation from foreign spouses, causing painful family disruptions. Yet practical realities of rebuilding required cooperation with neighboring peoples, leading to inevitable relationship formation. Benjamin's border position made this tension particularly acute, as daily interactions with non-Jewish communities created bonds that sometimes led to marriage despite official prohibition. Language itself marked the distance traveled from pre-exile identity. Hebrew, once the common tongue, now competed with Aramaic in daily use. Many younger Benjaminites spoke Aramaic as their primary language, using Hebrew mainly in religious contexts. This linguistic shift symbolized broader cultural adaptations. They remained Jews, but Jews transformed by exile and return. As decades passed under Persian rule, Jerusalem and its surrounding regions achieved a measure of stability unknown since pre-exile years. Temple rituals continued uninterrupted. Markets flourished. Children who had never known displacement grew to adulthood in ancestral lands. Benjamin's people, having survived national catastrophe through remarkable adaptability, settled into this new normal with characteristic pragmatism. Yet beneath this apparent stability, winds of change gathered force. To the west, a new power rose, Greece under Alexander, that would soon sweep away Persian authority and introduce cultural challenges more subtle, but perhaps more threatening than any military conquest. The Maccabees and the Hasmonean Revolt. The first hints of change arrived subtly in Benjamin's towns. Greek coins with strange profiles, merchants speaking an unfamiliar language, new fashions worn by travelers passing through. Alexander's conquests had redrawn the world's map, bringing Hellenistic influence to Jerusalem's doorstep. For Benjamin's people, positioned along major trade routes, this cultural wave reached them earlier than most. When Alexander died, his empire splintered. Benjamin's territory fell first under Ptolemaic Egyptian control, then passed to the Seleucid kingdom based in Syria. These transitions happened largely without violence. Tax collectors changed, but daily life continued much as before. Persian tolerance gave way to Greek governance models, yet religious practices remained protected, at least initially. Gradually, Hellenistic culture seeped into Jewish society. Gymnasiums opened in larger towns promoting Greek athletic and intellectual traditions. Young men from prominent families, including some Benjaminites, adopted Greek names alongside their Hebrew ones. This cultural shift accelerated under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who ascended the Seleucid throne in 175 BCE with ambitious Hellenization plans. Jerusalem's elite split into factions, traditionalists resisting Greek ways versus modernizers eager to embrace them. This divide cut through Benjamin's leadership as well, with urban families generally more open to Hellenistic influence than rural counterparts. Modi'in, a Benjaminite village near the coastal plain, became a hotbed of traditionalist sentiment under the leadership of an elderly priest named Mattathias. The simmering tension boiled over when Antiochus, facing military setbacks against Egypt, turned his frustration toward Jerusalem. In 167 BCE, his forces occupied the city, looted the temple treasury, and committed an act of supreme sacrilege, sacrificing pigs on the altar and dedicating the sanctuary to Zeus. For observant Jews, this abomination of desolation crossed a line no foreign ruler had dared breach before. Enforcement officers spread throughout the countryside, compelling sacrifice to Greek gods. When they reached Modi'in, Mattathias not only refused but killed both the officer and a Jew willing to comply. With this act of defiance, he and his 5 sons fled to the Judean hills, calling for resistance against religious persecution. Benjamin's territory, with its rugged terrain and hidden valleys, provided ideal settings for guerrilla warfare. Local knowledge of cave systems, water sources, and hidden paths gave Jewish fighters crucial advantages against Seleucid forces unfamiliar with the landscape. Many Benjaminites joined the spreading revolt, bringing their tribe's ancient warrior traditions into this new conflict. Judah, Mattathias' 3rd son, emerged as the rebellion's military genius. Nicknamed Maccabee, the Hammer, he developed hit-and-run tactics perfectly suited to his smaller forces. Benjaminite scouts provided valuable intelligence on Seleucid movements, while village networks supplied food and shelter to resistance fighters. Women participated by smuggling weapons beneath markets and passing messages through seemingly innocent village gossip. In 164 BCE, after a series of improbable victories, Judah's forces recaptured Jerusalem. The temple, desecrated by pagan worship, underwent ritual purification. When only enough sanctified oil for one day could be found for the eternal flame, it miraculously burned for 8 days until new oil could be prepared, an event celebrated ever since as Hanukkah. The struggle continued long after this symbolic victory. Seleucid forces still controlled strategic fortresses throughout the region. Hellenized Jews opposed to traditional religious practice created internal divisions. The Maccabean leadership, initially focused purely on religious freedom, gradually developed political ambitions that complicated their movement's mission. For Benjamin's communities, the conflict brought both devastation and opportunity. Villages near battle sites suffered repeated raids, with crops burned and livestock confiscated by whichever army passed through. Yet the power vacuum created by ongoing warfare allowed local leaders to assert greater autonomy than they had enjoyed under ordered imperial rule. When Jonathan Maccabee, succeeding his brother Judah, secured both military command and high priesthood, he established the Hasmonean dynasty, a Jewish ruling house not from David's line. This consolidation of religious and political power represented a radical departure from traditional leadership structures that's creating tension with those who believed these roles should remain separate. Simon, the last surviving son of Mattathias, finally achieved formal independence from Seleucid control in 142 BCE. Coins minted under his authority proclaimed, "For the freedom of Zion," tangible symbols of Jewish sovereignty after centuries of foreign rule. Benjaminite metalworkers, inheritors of ancient tribal crafting traditions, helped establish these minting operations. Hasmonean rule expanded Jewish territory beyond traditional boundaries, incorporating regions long controlled by other peoples. This territorial expansion created new challenges for Benjamin, whose identity had been shaped by their position as a border tribe. Now, with borders pushed outward, they found themselves in the kingdom's interior rather than its edge, a disorienting shift after centuries of frontier existence. John Hyrcanus, Simon's son and successor, pursued aggressive policies of forced conversion and territorial conquest. Under his leadership, the Idumeans, Edomites to the south, and Itureans to the north were conquered and compelled to adopt Jewish practices. For many Benjaminites, whose religious identity had been forged through resistance to compulsion, these policies raised uncomfortable questions about power and faith. Internal religious divisions sharpened during this period. The Pharisees emphasized Torah interpretation and adaptation to changing circumstances. The Sadducees held to temple-centered worship and literal scripture reading. The Essenes withdrew from what they saw as a corrupted society to pursue purity in isolated communities. Benjamin's families could be found in all these movements, reflecting the tribe's diverse approaches to preserving identity through changing times. Alexander Jannaeus, ruling from 103 to 76 BCE, expanded Hasmonean territory to its greatest extent while brutally suppressing internal opposition. During his reign, a civil war erupted between his supporters and the Pharisees. The conflict turned so bitter that Jannaeus reportedly crucified 800 Pharisee opponents and slaughtered their families while he dined within view of their suffering. This traumatic event deepened religious and political divisions that would never fully heal. After Jannaeus' death, his widow Salome Alexandra ruled more peacefully, reconciling with the Pharisees and stabilizing the kingdom. Her death in 67 BCE triggered a succession crisis between her sons Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II that ultimately invited Roman intervention. When both brothers appealed to Pompey the Great for support, they unwittingly opened the door to the next imperial power that would reshape Jewish life. Pompey's legions besieged Jerusalem in 63 BCE, eventually breaching the walls and entering the temple precincts. Roman soldiers penetrated even the Holy of Holies, a space officially entered only by the high priest once yearly. Though Pompey reportedly touched nothing inside, this violation marked the beginning of Roman dominance over Jewish affairs. Through these turbulent decades, Benjamin's identity continued evolving. Their ancient tribal connections remained important, but increasingly shared influence with religious affiliation, occupational networks, and political alignment. A Benjaminite farmer might feel stronger kinship with a Judahite Pharisee sharing his religious views than with a Benjaminite neighbor who supported the Sadducees. Greek language and culture, initially resisted, gradually became part of daily life, not replacing Jewish practice but existing alongside it. Many Benjaminites developed a functional bilingualism and cultural code switching, navigating both worlds with increasing comfort. This adaptability, long a tribal heuristic, served them well in increasingly complex social environments. As Roman influence solidified in the region, Benjamin's communities faced yet another imperial transition. The appointment of Herod, an Idumean with questionable Jewish credentials, as client king marked the end of even nominal Jewish independence. His massive rebuilding of the temple, while architecturally impressive, symbolized the uncomfortable accommodation between Jewish religious life and Roman political reality. This complex world of competing powers, internal divisions, and cultural pressures formed the setting into which Jesus of Nazareth would eventually be born, and in which a Benjaminite Pharisee named Saul, later called Paul, would help transform a Jewish sect into a world religion. Just the legacy of Benjamin, a tribe remembered. Dawn breaks over Jerusalem's western hills, casting golden light across ancient stones. Modern buildings rise where Benjaminite villages once stood, yet something endures beyond physical structures, the legacy of a tribe that history nearly erased. Their story, winding like a thread through Scripture's tapestry, offers timeless insights about survival, identity, and faith amid life's fiercest storms. Benjamin began as a child of sorrow, his mother Rachel dying in childbirth, naming him "son of my pain" with her final breath. His father Jacob renamed "son of my right hand," foreshadowing the tribe's dual nature throughout history. This tension between sorrow and strength, between tragedy and resilience, defined Benjamin's journey across centuries. Consider their remarkable survival. Twice they faced near extinction, first in the devastating civil war that left only 600 men alive at Rimmons Rock, later during Babylonian conquest when their territory bore the brunt of invasion. Yet each time they rebuilt from ashes. Their adaptability proved as valuable as any fortress wall, bending without breaking, transforming without losing their essential character. This survival instinct expressed itself through pragmatic choices rather than rigid ideology. When the kingdom divided, they calculated their interests and sided with Judah despite geographic ties to northern tribes. During exile, they learned Babylonian ways while maintaining private faith practices. Under Hellenistic influence, they adopted useful Greek concepts while resisting religious compromise. This practical flexibility, sometimes criticized as opportunism, actually reflected deep wisdom about balancing change and continuity. Benjamin's geographic position shaped their perspective in crucial ways. Their territory formed a natural border zone between larger powers, first between tribal groupings, later between kingdoms, eventually between empires. Living at these edges taught them to navigate competing worldviews, to translate between different cultures, to find paths forward when others saw only walls. This borderland existence contributed to the tribe's distinctive skills as mediators and bridge builders. When Paul of Tarsus, proudly identifying himself as of the tribe of Benjamin, carried Jewish concepts into Gentile contexts, he built on this tribal heritage of cultural translation. His unique ability to communicate across seemingly unbridgeable divides echoed Benjamin's centuries-long experience connecting divergent worlds. The tribe's military prowess became legendary, from Ehud's left-handed assassination of Eglon to the famous slingers who could target a hair's breadth without missing. This warrior tradition likely contributed to their selection as Israel's first monarchs. King Saul embodied their fighting spirit and strategic mind. Their reputation as defenders continued through Jerusalem's northern approach, where Benjaminite towns formed the capital's first line of defense for centuries. Yet their greatest strength may have been resilience after defeat. When Saul fell at Mount Gilboa, they transferred loyalty to David despite understandable reservations. When Jerusalem burned under Babylonian assault, they preserved essential traditions that enabled eventual return and rebuilding. When temple worship became impossible during exile, they developed alternative practices that evolved into synagogue gatherings, innovations that would preserve Jewish identity through 2,000 subsequent years of diaspora. Biblical writers often used Benjamin as a literary device representing larger themes. Saul's tragic reign illustrated the dangers of disobedience despite good intentions. The Gibeah atrocity demonstrated how tribal loyalty, when misplaced, could corrupt moral judgment. The tribe's near annihilation warned about cycles of vengeance and retaliation. Their survival against overwhelming odds testified to divine providence, working through history's darkest moments. In Jewish tradition, Benjamin holds special status as the only son born in the Promised Land rather than Mesopotamia. Rabbinic commentaries note that the Jerusalem temple's inner sanctuary stood within Benjamin's territory, making this youngest tribe host to God's most tangible presence. The Talmud suggests that Benjamin entered the Red Sea first during the Exodus, showing faith while others hesitated. These traditions highlight Benjamin's unique position in Israel's spiritual narrative. Christian interpretation added further dimensions to Benjamin's legacy. Augustine saw Paul's Benjaminite heritage as symbolically significant, ravening as a wolf in his early persecution of Christians, then distributing spiritual spoils through his later missionary work. Medieval commentators noted that Benjamin, born last among the patriarchs, prefigured the church as latecomers to covenant relationship. Revelation's vision of 12,000 sealed from each tribe, including Benjamin, suggested their continuing role in eschatological events. Modern archaeological discoveries have illuminated Benjamin's historical reality beyond textual references. Excavations at sites like Gibeon, Bethel, and Mizpah reveal sophisticated water systems, defensive structures, and trade connections spanning centuries. Material culture shows both continuity with broader Israelite patterns and distinctive regional variations. These physical remains confirm Benjamin's historical significance while adding texture to their biblical portrayal. For contemporary readers, Benjamin's story resonates with surprising relevance. Their experience as a minority community maintaining identity while adapting to changing circumstances mirrors challenges facing many traditional groups in globalized settings. Their balance between preservation and innovation offers wisdom for navigating cultural change without losing essential values. Their recovery from catastrophic losses speaks to human resilience in our own era of displacement and trauma. Benjamin's journey also illuminates broader patterns in Israel's spiritual development. Their transition from tribal confederation to monarchy, from monarchy to exile, from exile to religious community transcending political boundaries. Each phase required fundamental identity rethinking. How they maintain continuity through discontinuity Preserving core values while adapting expressions to new realities offers profound insights into religious evolution more generally. Perhaps most significantly, Benjamin's narrative challenges simplistic views of divine action in history. Their story includes troubling episodes like the Gibeah atrocity and its aftermath, moments when human choices led to devastating consequences. Yet it also includes surprising reversals, redemptive outcomes emerging from apparent disasters. This complexity invites theological reflection beyond easy answers. How divine purposes might work through, despite, or even against human actions. The tribe that began with a dying mother's cry ends as a testament to life's persistence against overwhelming odds. From Jacob's youngest son to a people scattered yet connected across centuries, Benjamin's legacy endures not through dominance or power, but through adaptability, resilience, and faithful presence along history's edges. As Jerusalem's morning light strengthens, touching ancient stones and modern structures alike, Benjamin's story reminds us that what appears nearly erased can nonetheless leave indelible marks on human consciousness. Their journey through Scripture's pages invites us to consider our own response when standing at the crossroads of tradition and transformation, of maintaining identity while embracing necessary change. In the end, Benjamin teaches us that survival itself constitutes a kind of victory, not just physical continuation, but the preservation of values, stories, and practices that give life meaning beyond mere existence. Their narrative whispers across centuries that even the smallest tribe facing history's harshest challenges can leave a legacy that outlasts empires. And perhaps in that endurance lies their greatest gift to all who encounter their remarkable story.